Welcome everybody to the Glentendo podcast. I'm Glentendo. This is my show. This show goes up every Thursday for supporters on Patreon each Thursday and becomes free to all the following Sunday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. This is a weekly Nintendo/Smash community podcast. This week, we have a very special celebratory episode. In this all gold edition of the Glentendo podcast, we're going to be celebrating the absolute GOAT, the greatest video game series of all time, turned 35 this week, The Legend of Zelda. And so we're going to be talking about the Zelda series, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about the Zelda Timeline and diving deep into some of the, we're going to be putting our tinfoil hats on and talking about some of the deep lore and conspiracy theories on how some of these games are secretly all connected. And we're going to get into some bizarre territory. I figured that's the best way to celebrate this insane, amazing, great series. I think there's going to be a lot of other podcasts that do, Zelda, my favorite Zelda game has a bomb in it, blah, blah, like this is my favorite. I hate all that stuff, man. I want to talk about Zelda in a cool, interesting way. I guarantee you no other podcast is going to do it this way. And joining me, we're having another TriCast this episode. Arhungry returning again, the illustrious owner of the youtube.com/Arhungry channel. Arhungry, say happy birthday to Zelda. She's right here. Happy birthday, please.
Usually, I don't do what you ask me to, but for Zelda, happy birthday.
She's very, very happy about that. And for the first time ever, joining us, we couldn't do this podcast and we couldn't dive into this tinfoil hat territory without the Zelda lore keeper, fellow Zelda expert. I would say outside of me and Hungry, this is the only person I would say knows and loves Zelda as much as we do. You might know him as the Smash player known as GWJ, but he's my friend David. David, say hello to Zelda. Say happy birthday. She's right here.
Hello, Zelda. Happy birthday.
So, this is David's first time on the podcast. So I kind of want to introduce David to our listeners and people who listen to my show. David, do you remember how we met? Because I think I remember, but you might have a different take on this. And it was many years ago at a Smash event. I'm sure all three of us have met at a Smash event, being competitors in Smash. But I'm going to ask you straight up if you remember, just off the top of your head, us meeting for the first time.
I don't think I do. My best guess is that maybe it was like a hitbox event or something, but I can't quite remember.
So you're right about that, because I remember exactly when I met you. So it was at a Hitbox event, which was a Tuesday, North Jersey local for Smash.
Classic.
And yeah, and I remember I had to play you. Okay, so I had just beaten someone who beat me all the time, right? And I finally got over this hump of a person, and I was like, okay, I feel better at the game now. And then I play you for the first time ever, and you were a Rosalina main at the time, right? And you proceed to speedrun me, bro. Like, it was... Dude, it was so embarrassing, and I like kept dying like really early. I feel like I didn't even hit you. Like, I hit you once the whole set, and the set was over in the blink of an eye. And I remember, like, I'm not exaggerating, I remember that was the first time that I ever lost to someone and went, I probably just shouldn't play this game anymore. Like, it was that bad, dude.
I'd love to hear it.
Horrible. You don't remember that at all?
It's coming back.
It's kind of like
it's like a Breath of the Wild memory right now. It's just like
it's like a M Bison. Like, to me, it was Tuesday.
Exactly. It was literally Tuesday.
It truly was.
Yeah. It was literally Tuesday, and I remember he played the set. You were very nice and respectful, but you were just like, yeah, just another free little bracket, little free thing. And for me, it was like, I'd never lost that hard in my life, so I remember it so vividly. And for you, it's like, oh, there's just another guy.
Did I have like an aura? Like like players have an aura.
Like Lucario aura?
No, like you walk by a really good player and you're like, oh, like you could tell.
Yeah, it was
Like,
like that.
did you look at me and be like, that guy's probably pretty good?
You know what the thing is that this happens to this day. If you go to a Smash local, right? All the good players kind of just hang out with each other. And so I remember walking in, and I was not really friends with anyone well yet. Like I would show up with Dugan, and he was the only person I would know. And Dugan would go and talk to you and Riz and Angel Cortez, and you guys would be in your own little corner. And I'd be like, oh, these are the guys that body everybody. And they're all talking to each other. So I just assumed that you were just like this godlike player.
Let's go.
But then the next time we played, many Tuesdays later, it was I who walked away with the W.
Really?
And I remember feeling like, because I felt so bad the first time we played, the second time we played, when I won, I was like, I'm finally feel like I'm better at this game now. And I remember Riz asked you like, hey, are you still in bracket? And you were like, I'm in losers now. And he's like, oh, who'd you lose to? And then you just went, I lost to Link. Like,
I really lost to you?
yeah.
I don't even. How?
Okay, so you went Rosa.
Oh my god.
You went Rosa, right?
Oh,
And
man.
I should have went Rob. Oh my
so
god.
here's the thing. You went Rosa, and game one was close, but you won. You like cheesed me with some gimp at like low percent because Link off stage was just like a sitting duck.
I actually
then-
remember watching this.
Yeah, and then game two, I
Oh, this is so
bodied you.
embarrassing.
Like I was like, I just clicked, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna body you. And then I bodied you, and then game three, you went Rob, and then I won. And I was like, let's go.
Disaster. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
I just wanted you to know that I brought up this whole story. You thought in the beginning it was because it was to make you look good, but it's actually because I beat you in the end. I would not have brought up this story if I didn't have a happy ending for me, bro.
My brain has like protected me from this memory for years.
Traumatizing.
It's been withholding this from me.
Oh my god.
This is what we do here at the Glentendo podcast. We open up band-aids.
Trauma.
We just poke around inside, see what happens.
God. If it was it on stream?
Yes,
Oh
sir.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't watch the VOD.
Yeah. What was the point of watching it? Just watching Link freaking kill someone with
I
rage?
never watch a VOD that I lose.
Yeah.
Never.
But
It's
yeah,
embarrassing.
I don't think we've ever played after that. We've certainly never played an Ultimate. That was like Smash 4 days. So I'm pretty sure we never played after that, right? I don't think so.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Hitbox is the reason that I picked up Rosa, by the way.
Why?
Because I lost to Shippo's Sheik to a true combo down throw bouncing fish, and I was so mad. I was like, I can't let this happen to me.
Down throw
So
bouncing
I
fish.
picked up a new character.
That's how you know that it's like really early in Smash Forward. It's down throw bouncing fish,
Yeah.
and not like forward throw.
Oh my god, that's insane.
It made me so mad. It was a true combo at like such a high percent.
So here's the thing. You've always been a Rob main, and then you played Rosa because she was obviously a way better character in 4. But then obviously in Ultimate, Rob is like way, way better now. So you're not one of those like dudes who just like, you're a real Rob main. Like you've been playing him forever, and you didn't just pick him up in Ultimate because he's freaking insanely good in this game.
Right. I picked him up in Brawl, but I mean it was basically accidental.
Right.
It's just the first character that clicked with me, so I was like, all right, guess I'm a Rob main.
And what about do you guys remember meeting each other? Do you guys have any stories about each other outside of me?
I'm sure it was like just another hitbox or something.
Yeah, I was probably hanging out with Riz, and he goes, "This is Barnes," and I'm like, "Okay, hi."
Yeah, that's probably exactly how it went.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like anyone who's friends with Riz, that's like already just like
Pretty good
I know
sign.
I'm gonna be a friend. I'm gonna be friends with this person too. So at that point, I was like, oh, okay, this guy must be cool because Riz is only friends with the best people in the Smash community. But yeah, so we're gonna dive deep into the Zelda timeline. But first, we're gonna have to go into a brief history of this amazing and legendary series. So on February 21st, 1986, The Legend of Zelda was released on the Famicom Disk System in Japan. Um, and obviously, the video game industry was completely changed after that in terms of game design, because it's the first game ever to have a built-in memory card where you can save your progress as you go. Before that, it was like games had this like weird like code
Password.
system. Yeah, the password system where you'd put in a password and the game would go, okay, this is generally where you were in the last time that you played.
Well, the way that works really is that like the game like holds values for different things that you have, for different points you can be in, and the password
Mhm.
literally is just those values.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
just like hard coded values in
Yeah,
like a
exactly,
list.
So,
exactly.
question though, but then like I don't know if many games it would even if this would apply to many games, but like let's say you had like I don't know, let's say you were playing Metroid, because I know Metroid had this password system, and you had, you know, you used 3 power bombs and you have out of 5. The code couldn't save that level of coding, right?
It depends how like big the code is and kind of the values that it would save.
Right.
Sometimes it would save like like let's say a code was simple and it didn't have like a value for how many power bombs you have. It would just spawn you with the specific amount it wanted you to have.
Right, right.
Like let's
I bet
say
you though it doesn't it just like resets the value on them.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it could be like let's say you had like 67 health, right? You would spawn with just 30, every time, no matter how many health you had. Something like that. It depends. Some
Otherwise you would just need so many passwords to
yeah,
account for like
Yeah.
every
but
possible.
yeah, but some NES games had insanely huge passwords, like four lines of password code. You know what I mean?
Oh my
Wow.
god.
Like it was horrible sometimes.
It's like be a programmer just to save your progress and
Basically.
eventually you want. But yeah, so this allowed for like this long form gaming that you could not have done on an arcade, and it was like a new thing for home consoles where you had this bigger adventure and you could go around and you solve all these puzzles and find all these items. Like even Mario, like Super Mario Brothers, the original on the NES, like there are shortcuts and stuff, and there's like a lot there to help you with, every time you sit down they're assuming you're going to be starting from scratch. So there's a lot of warps, and a lot of the game is designed around alleviating that. Whereas Zelda is designed around like you can't beat this in one sitting. Like it would be very difficult for you, and we're purposely making this game to be this bigger, like awesome experience. And so fast forward to 35 years later, we're here, and obviously Zelda's gone through like a million evolutions, and like it's the one of the blueprints for modern video games in general, in all genres, but especially action adventures and RPGs and stuff like that. Um, so I think so. This is something Hungry convinced me of. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago, like, what's the best video game series of all time, I would have said, okay, it's obviously Mario, and Zelda's like very close second place. But Hungry convinced me that Zelda is actually better than Mario as a series. And so what do you guys actually think, like, in terms of, do you guys agree, why or why not, that The Legend of Zelda is actually the greatest video game series of all time? Hungry, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so obviously, I think it's the greatest video game series of all time.
Surprise.
Oh, big surprise! I'm the one who convinced you, right? So basically, my general thoughts on that is that the ironically enough, the Zelda series is like extremely brave. You know, they can, they're never gonna rest on the laurels of the past game. They're never gonna take the Zelda name for granted and be like, we can just churn out another Zelda game and everyone's gonna eat it up. Like every single entry in the series, every single one, right, has some unique selling point to it. There's no game in the series that you can go, you don't gotta play that one because this one does just that but better, you know.
Right.
And every game is great. There's no game that's like okay or good. Every single game is at least great or a masterpiece level, genre defining game, right?
Yeah.
That's how crazy and there's like 20 games, like or more, right?
It is so many.
Depending on how you see it, like spin-offs and whatever, right? Or like if you count the portables or not, like there is a crazy amount of games and all of them are unique and great and just ugh, like even if it's not your favorite games, right? You can't deny the level of quality of each game.
Right, yeah. David, what do you think?
Um, well, for one, I think Zelda is obviously better than Mario, just outside of the whole best video game franchise thing.
Mhm.
So, that's a given. Um, but in terms of Zelda, I think one area where it offers a lot more than a lot of other games do, um, besides for maybe like Metroid, is the the lore elements and the relatively consistent pattern of reusing symbology and stuff like that throughout their games in such a way that you're able to weave together a kind of like a coherent chronology. Whereas with like
Yeah.
Mario games, it's like, you know, where does Paper Mario happen with relation to anything else? Who knows?
Right.
That's not a consideration. Like there's no like master, story timeline of Mario. If there was, it would just be a bunch of different universes because like I don't think I don't think many of them reference each other.
Well, it's what's one of the things in Galaxy, like the Galaxy basically resets the end of the first game, and the second one is basically just the first game again.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
with
it's messy, but it doesn't. Like, yeah, it's not really a priority in those
yeah,
games.
with Mario, it feels like the universe is way more interesting in terms of like the properties of the universe, like what you do in the universe. Like, oh, there's blocks and there's pipes and there's coins and there's like raccoon suits. Like the activities are more fun. But with Zelda, there's this lore element. And like obviously we're gonna get into that very heavily in a minute. But yeah, like I see what you're saying, where there's way more significance and there's way more just the concept of Zelda being this thing where these three archetypes of characters always like it reincarnates itself and this history kind of repeats itself. It's always different but quite the same at the same time. That whole thing, it just already just when you think about that, that is so interesting. My take on it, the reason why I would say that Zelda's the absolute goat is because before I talked to Hungry about this, what I would have said is that I think Mario to this day still has like the higher peaks in terms of I think Super Mario 64, looking at the longevity of that game and how people still play it to this day and how important it is to gaming at the same time, like it serves on both of those it fires on both of those like elements. But the thing about Zelda that I think makes it a better series is that even though I would say Mario has higher highs, there are more Zelda games that I think if I had to make like a 20 game, if I had to make a list of 20 games that you have to play just as a human being, as someone who likes video games, there's going to be more Zelda games on there than Mario games. Like, I think there's more unique experiences in Zelda. You have to play the first one. You have to play Link to the Past. You have to play Ocarina of Time. You have to play Majora's Mask. You have to play Breath of the Wild. Like you can make an argument for Wind Waker, Twilight Princess. Like you can make an argument for a lot of the other ones too. So I just think in terms of that, and in terms of just like it's not even it's not the most successful game series of all time in terms of how many units it's sold and stuff, but critical acclaim like Breath of the Wild has the most perfect review scores out of any game in history, and Ocarina of Time has the highest Metacritic average of all time, kind of because it was a different era back then, but it was like the first like 10 out of 10 game. It was like the first time that people started thinking of games that way, where it was like, dude, this game is so far beyond what we thought. So just obviously everything both of you guys said, but on top of that, this series has just, dude, 35 years. Like it's older than all three of us. And on top of that, I can't name a property in any other medium that has been this good for 35 years. Like there are people who think Breath of the Wild is the most successful Zelda game ever, and it's the last one that came out. It's the most recent one. Like, is the most recent Star Wars the most successful and critically acclaimed? No. You know what I mean? Like Star Wars and James Bond are the only properties I think have been around as long as Zelda with sequels that are still relevant. And it can't compete relative to the industry. Like in gaming, Zelda is at another level. So yeah, this series, I mean, I'm convinced that it's the best gaming series. And so to celebrate that, we're gonna go and into this timeline, and we're gonna talk deeply about this timeline, and then we're gonna comment on each game in the timeline. So 10 years ago, for the 25th anniversary, Nintendo released the Hyrule Historia, right, in 2011. And even though it didn't come to the States, I think until 2013, but in Japan, it was 2011. And for the first time ever, they acknowledged that there is a connection and a formal timeline between these games. Because before this came out, it was purely fan speculation how each game was connected. Like there are some obvious ones, like obviously Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. Those are direct. That's a direct sequel. But outside of like those exceptions, like this is the only gaming series I could think of, to go back to what David said earlier, where the lore is very interesting in that, the first game in the series is not the first game in the timeline. And every game kind of just jumps around the timeline, and you can interpret it and connect the dots in so many interesting ways. So finally we got this awesome timeline. Do you guys remember, like, when the timeline came out, do you remember your general thoughts on it? Like, just like, whoa, there's a Zelda timeline? Hungry, do you remember?
Okay, so before the Zelda Timeline came out, I kind of had my own theories about it, and I think probably the cutest thing I had in my original timeline was like, oh, Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, those are the Legend of Zelda. Those actually aren't part of the timeline.
I love
You
it.
know?
Wait,
You know,
what? Wait. Explain
I
how
think
you
it's a
got to
great
that.
idea.
That's an amazing idea, but I want to understand how that
because
you
the
thought of
first,
that.
because Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, they're very self-contained, right? There's not really uh a lot of connections back to those games, right? Like it's very loosely connected, if there are connections. And in my brain, I was like, oh, because those are the first two. Those are before they started caring about like the world, right?
Oh, I
So
see
like
what
this
you're
is
saying.
the whole story of Zelda. This is the legend of Zelda, you know.
Yeah.
So like that for me, that was my head canon of it. Like I would just be like, this is what the all the stories and legends in their world is about, you know.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
um, I as soon as I saw it, I was like, there can't be three splits. That's garbage. Like, cause Ocarina of Time splits in three ways. It's like
Yeah.
when Link is successful, and
We'll get to
Ganon
that.
is, yeah,
We'll get to that.
yeah. So as soon as I saw three splits, we'll get to more later. I was just like, I can't accept this.
But David, what did you think when you first saw that?
I was excited. Uh,
Yeah.
when I saw it, I was like, why didn't I think of that? Of course, there's three. Of course, there's three splits.
Yeah.
Um, the you have the rule of three in Zelda.
Right.
It just seems so poetic. Now that you actually see it, it's like, oh, of course.
Yeah. I remember liking the timeline because, well, first of all, I just thought it was interesting, right? Because it's like, Nintendo's reputation is that they're so secretive about literally everything, where
Hmm.
for them to formally even acknowledge that, like, fans were making their own timelines for a long, long time. And so for them to finally just go, okay, here it is. That was really interesting that they actually, I never thought that they would ever do that, because I thought it's more convenient for them as designers to leave the freedom of, like, there's no timeline, so we could do whatever we want and we don't have to pay attention to this. So when they acknowledged it, I thought it was interesting. But I also thought it was interesting because Ocarina of Time is my favorite video game ever, and it's my favorite Zelda, and it makes that one the most important one because it's at the center of the timeline. I'm like, oh, let's
Yeah.
go. That's hype. Um, so yeah, they finally did that in 2011, and since then, it's funny because we have actually only gotten like three real Zelda games since 2011. We've gotten like A Link Between Worlds, Skyward Sword came out in 2011, and Breath of the Wild, and that's it. So the timeline is basically unchanged since then.
Well, Triforce Heroes.
Oh, that's right, and yeah, and we'll get to that
Some
as
people
well.
have argued Hyrule Warriors, and obviously the new Hyrule Warriors is like its own separate, but still,
Oh yeah, Hyrule Warriors was Wii U. That was
yeah,
post Skyward Sword.
yeah.
What a great game.
Yeah, how much lore how much, because I know that there is story elements in that and there's a lot more in Age of Calamity, but like like how much did that affect the timeline, the like Hyrule Warriors games?
Depends who you ask.
None, because it's not considered canon.
Okay, so
No
it's
one thinks it's
actually, yeah.
canon.
I've seen some stuff. It's pretty
Yeah.
bad, but you know, at least interesting to see it.
Some people try and fit it in, but
I mean, I
um,
don't buy it.
ultimately, it's not made by Nintendo. I don't think it's really got the endorsement on the story side.
Oh, except for the new one.
Right, except for the new one,
And you know,
unfortunately.
obviously,
Unfortunately.
yeah, and obviously the CDI games, it goes without saying those are not even Zelda games to me. In my mind, I would never even think that those are Zelda games, let alone including them in the timeline. Like,
What about BS Zelda, the broadcast service game that
oh
was
yeah,
only in Japan? Does that count?
I actually think one of them is canon.
There
The
they,
you go.
Stone Tablets one,
they
There
need
you
to
go.
put that out. They need to actually put that game out.
for
That
sure. I agree.
So for people who don't know, on the Super Nintendo, they had this like weird service where you can like subscribe to this satellite network, and at the time that was like kind of like early form of like internet stuff. And so Nintendo had this thing called Satellaview, and they were making like little Mario and Zelda. It kind of like what now you might call like DLC or something. And it would basically just take like a Link to the Past or Super Mario World, and it would kind of like use that the assets for those games to make like a new game. And the one for the Zelda one was called Zelda BS, I think it was called,
It was
right?
BS Zelda, and then each of them had like their own like subtitle.
hmm
BS standing for like broadcast service.
Oh, that's what it stands for.
Broadcast service, yeah.
Wow.
All right, so before we jump into this timeline, you know, this is going to be very spoilery. Obviously, there's no way to do this right without spoiling the stuff. We have to talk about like the endings of certain games, certain characters that appear, and the beginnings of other games, how they link together. So if you're like, dude, at this point, if you made it this far, just enjoy the spoilers, bro. Like it's too late. Let's just go full throttle. Don't turn this off. All right, I hate spoiler warnings for that reason. But anyway, the first game in the timeline officially is The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. So it's interesting because right when the timeline came out, the first game in the timeline is the game that came out that year, and it is Skyward Sword. And the whole thing around Skyward Sword is that it's the origin of the Master Sword. So the game kind of walks you through the origin of that sword, which obviously is like a central element of every Zelda game afterward. And it also, by the end of the game, they kind of like, it's kind of an origin story for like the birth of Hyrule, like as a land. So
Yeah,
yeah, so because you have the Hylians are starting up in the sky and then they fall down at towards the end, and you see like Link and Zelda basically, you know, starting what becomes of the first Hyrule.
time to populate.
Yes. So what are your thoughts on Hyrule, on Skyward Sword, and what do you think is like really important about this game in terms of like the timeline and establishing it? Hungry, you can go first.
Okay, so my first impression was I was immediately upset
Why?
because he has a hat, and if you know
Oh yeah,
anything, the Minish Cap is the
Uh,
origin of the hat.
yes,
So it was probably just an oversight, but it was just like pay some respect, man.
yeah.
Uh, and so
I was gonna mention that when we got to the Minish Cap because
yeah,
that's the whole point of that game is like Skyward Sword is the origin of the Master Sword and the Minish Cap is the origin of the hat,
except
yeah,
not really.
except not really.
I
Yeah.
guess not. So the I think the most interesting thing about Skyward Sword, at least for me, was those the ruins were there already. You know, were they're already ruins. So
Mhm.
it kind of implies that things already started going bad for the Zelda universe at that point, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff with like the time stones because like even going back to then, right? Like those things were invented at that time that they were being used, right?
Hmm.
So there's a little confusion about how that works.
Yeah, and David has when we get to the end of the timeline, we get into the conspiracy parts of it, like that the theories, the really cool stuff.
Yeah,
The
but
time sequence
that
where
was just kind of my general impression of like a
yeah.
little bit of confusion there,
Mhm.
and
Oh, so you're saying like, okay, you played the game for the
when I
first
was
time.
playing it, I felt those things. I'm saying.
Right, right. So it's like this is supposed to be the first game in the series, and you're like, okay, so why are there already, like these established civilizations and dungeons and all that Zelda stuff?
Yeah, because
Yeah,
a lot of the places are in ruins already, you
right.
know,
Hmm.
and getting an origin for the master story is cool, right? And then the demise thing is, in my opinion, I thought it was kind of unnecessary, but
Mhm.
it's cool to see like Ganon himself is kind of like a curse to the world almost, you know.
Yeah,
It's cool, but it's also kind of not really necessary.
yeah, so like the central villain of Skyward Sword is not Ganon. It's this being called Demise, and Girahim is like the villain that most people see first because he's like on the box art and everything. But
Yeah,
Girahim, it turns out he's like an analog to Fi. Fi is the spirit of the Master Sword, so she becomes the Master Sword at the end of the game, and she's in the Master Sword. And Girahim is the exact same thing for a different sword, which you see Demise using, and so Demise is almost like this it's almost just like a force of nature that, and he says in the game like, I'm going to be coming back, like you only defeated me temporarily, and like it's basically you can draw the connection that every time you see Ganon is just like another reincarnation of this, or the original thing is Demise. Like Ganon is just an iteration on Demise. But yeah, so David, what do you think about Skyward Sword and all that?
Um, well, to piggyback on the demise thing, I think I think an interesting revelation on that concept came to me when I saw a different translation of the original Japanese. The games are translated, and you know sometimes going from language to language you can lose meanings, and sometimes words kind of change.
Right.
Um, and with the demise thing, looking at the actual text, it doesn't seem to me, it doesn't seem to imply that it's like demise himself that's like reincarnating over and over. More so, he seems to be indicating like a general like curse of the demon tribe. Like it's a not like it's a curse in the sense that like I'm gonna place a curse on you, but a curse in the sense that like as long as the Triforce exists and as long as the World of Light isn't where they get to live, they're gonna keep trying to conquer it. And so it's like,
Mm.
sure, you guys like Hylia, you guys can reincarnate, and good for you. But as long as you guys, are still existing and are still controlling the World of Light, we're just going to keep attacking you over and over, and you're going to have to basically watch everything crumble over and over, like as like kind of a curse in a sense.
Right, yeah. And one of the other interesting things about the thing you mentioned about like Hylia and everything is that it's actually funny that this is the first game in the timeline because there's actually the game begins with, this like picturesque like storybook prologue that shows you like there was already so much going on in that universe before Link and Zelda and the whole Triforce and the Master Sword, like before the things that we know about the Zelda series existed. There was so much stuff going on. There's obviously the goddess of Hylia, and she's like this central figure in the prologue.
Hmm.
And you see her like with the harp and stuff, and that's the statue that you see in Skyward Sword and later in Breath of the Wild of like this giant goddess and stuff. She's like this reoccurring figure throughout the series. And so there's this whole history before that. Like the only thing that the timeline says happened before Skyward Sword is, that universe was created. It's just creation from,
Sure,
the
yeah,
goddess. And
creation
so,
story and just
yeah,
blank.
exactly. So it's interesting to me that in the future, the Zelda series can explore even before Skyward Sword. Like, there's no reason why there can't be more stuff before
That's
this.
exactly what I'm trying to say. You see, like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff was already kind of going bad for them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because the prologue begins with like that painting of Hylia, and you see demons and stuff, and you see what looks like a pig Ganon. Like I remember right in the beginning when I plugged that game in for the first time, I was like, oh, like maybe Ganon is in this game. But they only refer to Demise on the timeline as the Demon King. And it's almost like the Demon King can be Ganon, but it can also be just other forms. And so in this, it takes the form of this person named Demise, or
It's a
this
title.
entity. Yeah, it's a title, exactly. It's like being the president.
There's actually been other Demon Kings other than Ganon and Demise. The villain, I think his name's Malladus from Spirit Tracks or Phantom Hourglass, one of the two.
Right. Yeah,
His title is Demon King. As far as I know, he's Ganon scale basically.
right. Yeah, that's right. And it's funny how like they it's almost like it's supposed to be a metaphor for just like very basic like human struggle stuff. Like demise is obviously a play on the word demise. You know what I mean? Like for
It's
you
not
to
even a
meet,
play. It's
it's
just a word.
It's
literally
just the
that.
name. It's just the word.
And malleus is obviously malice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They it's funny because
Or
in the
malady.
yeah, exactly.
Ooh,
It's kind of how I remember a long time ago
that's
someone
game
pointed out to
theory.
me. Uh, someone pointed out to me a long time ago how the word devil is just evil with a D at the front of it, and
Oh boy.
the word God is just good without the O, without the extra O. So it's kind of reminds me of that, where it's like it's kind of on the nose, but it takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it depends when you're it's going that far. It's like what Yahweh and stuff like that. It's like,
yeah,
how do you fit that into there? You know. Well,
yeah,
that's whatever. Keep going.
yeah.
Pro etymologists.
Yeah.
Yeah, so according to the timeline, Skyward Sword, the emergence and sealing of the Demon King, the goddess Hylia is reborn as Zelda. So this is according to the timeline, it's the first time the goddess Hylia is reincarnated as Zelda,
Hmm.
and the Master Sword is forged, which obviously is like the main thing that you do during that game. Then it says in between the next game, it says the banishment of the Twilight occurs, the sacred realm is sealed, and the kingdom of Hyrule is founded, which obviously you see at the very end of Skyward Sword. They're venturing off to like form that the land that becomes Hyrule. And then we have the Minish Cap, and the Four Sword is born from the Blade of Picori legend and the rise and sealing away of the demon Vati. So Vati is the main villain of the Minish Cap. This game does not have Ganon in it or anyone like that. It's one of the few times that there's not like a Ganon as the main antagonist of a Zelda game.
Hmm.
And um, this game was, like we said a little earlier, it was supposed to be, this game came out before Skyward Sword. So at the time, it seemed like this was the first game in the timeline because the the buddy, a lot of Zelda games give you some kind of companion, right? But the companion in this game was this like bird looking guy who gets turned into a hat. And the hat is the classic Zelda hat. And so it looks like Link is just wearing his classic Zelda green pointy hat, but the beak comes out in the eye, and he has like a face and stuff, and he talks to you as you play, and he helps you out. And the whole story kind of walks you through the origin of that hat. And then like at the end of the game, it's like, oh, this was the legendary hero who saved everything, and now people wear this outfit and wear that hat in honor of him and all that. And obviously Hungry mentioned earlier, like in Skyward Sword, they kind of show you that the hat originated from that school that Link is in at the beginning of the game. You're in the night school, and all the knights, they wear that outfit, the classic, the Link tunic.
Yeah. Some of
And
them are different colors, like
it just,
yellow or blue or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, they're just different colors. But yeah, so this
You happen
game,
to have a green one, and you don't even like it.
so it's interesting how this game Minish Cap, which came out in the Game Boy Advance, this would have been the first game in the Zelda timeline had it not been for Skyward Sword retconning that. So they have a
And
little.
an interesting thing about Minish Cap is that one of the bosses is like a choo choo,
Mhm.
right? So like the choo choos have always existed in this very tiny form. Oh, actually, no, they're huge in that game.
No, yeah, yeah,
So the
yeah.
choo choos have existed, but they're not in a lot of the other games. But they
Well,
come back into flourish in
are
Wind
they?
Waker.
Oh, right, yeah. Are they huge, or was Link just
No,
tiny?
Link is small, so they're
They're
huge.
regular
They're
size. Link
maybe
is just
that's
tiny.
basically what I'm trying to say. Like
Yeah,
you're small, they're huge.
The
So
boss was just like
I'll choo
a
choo.
regular
a
choo choo,
regular choo choo. Yeah,
just a slime,
yeah.
Yeah.
basically.
So, David, what is important or interesting about the Minish Cap as it pertains to like the timeline?
Um, well, obviously you have the creation of the Four Sword, which means that obviously the Four Swords games would have to take place after Minish Cap.
Hmm.
Um, in the same way that that you see the Master Sword Forge in Skyward Sword, you can't really put anything before it that has the Master Sword in it. Um, so yeah, and with the Minish Cap, generally the reason, as far as I know, that people consider Minish Cap to be so early in the timeline is that it kind of presents a very small Hyrule that looks like it's just kind of very early on in I guess in the kingdom's lifespan, um, and it's
Right.
pretty much just off of aesthetics.
It's a
Um,
it's a pretty humble game in that sense, where it's like everything's very small.
yeah,
Pun
the world
intended.
map is kind of weird because it doesn't really match the other games. Like, there's no Death Mountain, but you have like Castor Mountain, or like I forget the
Right.
name, but like you have there's just landmarks are just not there. Some people say it's like because Minish Cap is like taking place in like a subsection of like the larger Hyrule, or like they move locations. My guess is that it still is Hyrule. It's just like the names just changed, and like other games, like the landmarks kind of move around for no real reason.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they always kind of get around that by having like there are usually such huge time gaps between the story of one game and the other that like it would be normal for landscapes to completely shift between games. The notable thing to me about this game is that so they have this tribe of people called the Pickery, right? And they're like the tiny people because one of the big gameplay hooks of this game is that Link goes from being regular size to being like really really tiny, like borderline microscopic, and it changes the way that you navigate the world. And so yeah, a normal choo choo that you would usually just hit once and he would die, now he's a boss. And like that game was really cool for that. So the Pickery are these tiny people that you encounter throughout the game, and they're the ones who give you the Pickery sword, which later becomes the Four Sword, which becomes important in the timeline when we get to later on, which is actually the next game actually. So the next game is Four Swords. Now, is this does this Four Swords the A Link to the Past Game Boy Advance like edition, or is it because that's the first time they ever put out Four Swords was with A Link to the Past Game Boy port.
Yeah,
It
I
had
think
Four
so.
Swords. But then later on they had two other games that are technically Four Swords. So is it's that one I'm assuming?
I'm pretty sure it's the one that came packaged with the Link to the Past.
Right. Okay. So then the Four Swords is after the Minish Cap, and it's the third game in the timeline. And all it's really notable for is the revival of Vadi, which was the villain from Minish Cap, and he's sealed once again by the Four Sword. And that's pretty much all there is on that one game. Is there any other reason why this game would be interesting at all to the timeline or to the lore?
Nah, not really. Pretty unremarkable.
Okay, so then we head into the Hyrulean Civil War. On this timeline, in between games, there are like major occurrences. So one of the ones here is after Four Sword, it says the Hyrulean Civil War begins. And then the legendary events of Ocarina of Time. And this is arguably the most important game in the timeline for reasons that we'll get into. We're probably going to spend a lot of time on Ocarina of Time. So the it says Ganondorf, King of Thieves, enters the Sacred Realm. The Triforce splits, and Ganondorf transforms into Ganon, the Demon King. So this is kind of the first game where the Triforce splits. Am I right about that?
Um,
Does
yeah.
that happen in Skyward Sword? I don't think it does, right?
Well, like before Link collects them, each of the pieces are individually stored in like a separate like location, but still all within the same like realm. So I consider it kind of together still.
Right, yeah. Right. So, in the events of Ocarina of Time, the Triforce is sealed away behind a door to the Sacred Realm. But to open that door, you need these three relics, and you need to also have this song play specifically from the Ocarina. So, one of the things that happens in Ocarina of Time very early in the game is that you collect all these pieces, and you find out that Ganon was just waiting for you to do it for him so that he can enter the Sacred Realm. And so he enters the Sacred Realm. He tries to obtain the Triforce, and then there's a time skip of 7 years later where Link awakens as an adult in front of the Master Sword, and the world is completely ruined by Ganondorf entering the Sacred Realm. But apparently, when he entered the Sacred Realm and he touched the Triforce, the part of the canon of the universe is that it if it deems that you are not worthy or something, it splits. And so once he tried to take the Triforce, it split into pieces, and the piece of courage went to Link, the piece of wisdom went to Zelda, and the piece of power went to Ganon. So even though he did go through the Sacred Realm in Ocarina of Time at the beginning of that game, or kind of like 1/3 into it, he still wasn't able to get the entire Triforce and take over the universe or whatever, all the power that grants you. It just caused more problems and trouble for that universe. So then, this is why this game is so interesting in the timeline, because then the timeline splits into 3 different timelines. So we get into the time paradox type of stuff. And this is where a lot of people get confused with what's going on. Before we get to the time splitting, is there anything of note to mention in Ocarina of Time that besides the splitting of the timeline? Hungry, do you have anything that you want to point out?
My first notable thing to say is that Ocarina of Time Zelda is the biggest jobber of all time. Literally of all time. She
The
literally
biggest what?
Wait,
jobber.
what is a jobber?
It's like someone who like it's like someone
Jobber.
who's like it's like it's not like their main occupation almost. So they just always mess it up. Like
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like or another way to see it is like especially during you use it a lot in wrestling. Like someone who deliberately loses a match all the time, right?
Being a
They call
pot
them
filler.
jobbers. A
Job.
pot filler, yeah, pot filler's kind of like a jobber, right? So
To-
it's kind of involved into being anyone who does their job really badly. You know,
yeah.
that's
Um,
kind of what people use her for now.
To
So
be
she's the
fair,
ultimate jobber.
to be
she
fair, I will say one thing. Yeah, I'll let you continue, but the only thing I want to say is she's also like, 10 years old in this game when she messes everything up.
Get over it. She ruined everything.
yeah, she was actually kind of bad.
Yeah.
So, one interesting thing from when you first play the game, because this was not my first Zelda game. This was maybe like my second or third Zelda game, right? Because I think at least my third. It might have been my fourth. It's hard to remember, but it's the first time you see Zoras as peaceful beings and that are
Oh,
um,
right.
they're kind of in lieu with Hyrule. You know, they're not like
Monsters.
yeah, because there is a Zora in Link to the Past who does talk to you, but he's also just not interested in you like personally, right?
Yeah, he's like
Gives you
the
the
only one.
flippers, right? And the rest of them are just they just attack you on sight.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they're not intelligent. It just means that they're hostile, right? Because there's at least one intelligent Zora before that. Oh, and other Zelda games, right? Not before in the timeline, right? So it's interesting to see they went from being, if we believe this is how it's supposed to be, the timeline goes, right? I mean, something happened to the Zora in the meantime for them to go from uh, intelligent and peaceful or to non-intelligent and like violent and hostile to
Yeah.
Hylians, you know?
It's funny because in the very first Zelda game on the NES, the Zoras are probably the oldest race in terms of like outside of the timeline, like just in terms of like the actual game releases. Because I didn't know those were Zoras, because when I played Link to the Past and the first Zelda game, I thought, dude, they literally look like Gyarados. I just thought there was like Gyarados shooting beams at me from the ocean, dude. Like that's what I thought when I played those games. Um, but yeah, do you have any interesting insights on this so far, David?
Well, with the Zora, there's actually a popular theory out there that um, there's actually a distinction between the River Zora and the Ocean or Sea Zora, and that I forget which is which, but like basically one of them is supposed to be the friendly one, and the other one is supposed to be the aggressive one. And like supposedly, the friendly one's like died off or left
Right.
like in the timeline or something.
That's
Yeah.
interesting because because it's maybe the wording is just wrong. They just using it because in Ocarina of Time, it's lake. They live in a lake. And they don't live in the ocean.
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe it's like maybe the theory is still can hold water, but
I I
Oh
don't
my
know.
god.
I mean, it's never really ever explained. It's just
yeah.
like
But
it's
it's interesting to think about.
yeah. Um oof. There really is actually a lot that is kind of going on in Ocarina of Time. The Civil War that's mentioned on the timeline as like happening right before, that would be the same conflict that um, Link's mother would have died from, and the reason why Link was brought to the Deku Tree in the beginning.
Yeah, that's
Right.
true too.
That's the catalyst for it.
Yeah,
Um,
so when you are so obviously the game begins with Link being the only kid in the forest who doesn't have a fairy, right? And it's like why doesn't he have a fairy? And then he finally gets one in the form of Navi, who is sent to him from the Deku Tree. And so it's funny because it almost like implies that he was picked on in the Kokiri Forest, or that Saria was like the only nice one to him or something because he was this outcast who didn't have a fairy.
Well, it's not implied. It's like you see it in their attitudes when you talk to them, like when you go to the first area there.
Yeah, and then there's that one kid, Mido, and he's just constantly like blocking you, and like he's just like, you don't have a fairy, like you're a loser. And
yeah,
then you go to the Deku Tree, and the Deku Tree sends you off on this bigger mission, and then you find out later on when you turn into adult Link that part of the reason why Linky can even turn into an adult is because he is not a Kokiri. The Kokiris are like the only people you go back to as an adult that are exactly the same, and they're all little kids, and they're like, "Whoa, you're huge!" And then the Deku Tree sprout in the future, he tells you, "Hey, you're a Hylian. You're not a Kokiri. There was a war." And your mom came to this forest, and she, before dying, left you here, and we raised you as one of our own. So yeah, that's kind of the Civil War plays into Link's origin directly in Ocarina of Time.
Another cool thing about like the Civil War kind of thing is there are like two areas in Ocarina of Time that are highly suspect. The first one being the Shadow Temple, the second one being underneath the well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those places existed already, and they're pretty horrific. They kind of imply like a torture and like the bottom of the well specifically. There's a lot of like
not even
torture.
imply. It's
Yeah,
stronger than that.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. There's like in the original version, there's blood on the floor. There's chains, there's cells, right? There's
yeah.
very suspect thing going on there, right?
There's quite literally like guillotines too.
Yeah. So those places existed for a reason, right? And some of the temples in the game, they kind of imply that they're actual spiritual temples, right? And some of them are like kind of like the forest temple is almost like a castle, right? And the shadow temple is like obviously a place of like death and torture underneath the well as well. So those are things could have been used in the Civil War, like prisoners of war and stuff like that.
Yeah, and also, dude, one of the coolest memories I have of Ocarina of Time, and it's something that you can miss very easily when you play that game, is if you after Ganon, you collect the three relics, right? And you get the Ocarina of Time finally for the first time. And you see Zelda running away, and Ganon's chasing her, and he shoots you in the chest with like a little beam, and she throws the ocarina back, and then you grab it. And most people just, the next thing to do in the game is to go straight to the Temple of Time, and then you turn into an adult and you continue the game. But in that moment, if you go through one of the back alleys of the castle town, there's a soldier who's like in the back of the alley, and he's like
Hmm.
on his deathbed, and he
Yeah.
only has like a few lines of text. Um, but it's almost like he was maybe it's almost like this Civil War, even though you don't see it directly in Ocarina of Time, like through your gameplay, you don't see people at war. It's almost implied that it's happening, and or that guard could have also just trying to protect Zelda, and Ganon maybe dealt.
That's what I took from
Well,
it. Yeah,
Yeah, I did as well.
yeah.
I
So
remember doing that, and I don't know why. I'm like, I'm gonna go back to this alley for some reason. Like I had literally no reason to do it. I was like, oh my god, he just died. I'm
yeah,
like a little kid.
That's pretty creepy though.
Yeah,
yeah.
the N64 Zelda games are way darker than anything else in the series.
Hmm.
Yeah, and also the other notable thing about Ocarina of Time is that it's the first time that we see Ganon, but in this case, it's Ganondorf. So,
In his human
Ganondorf
form.
Ganondorf, yeah, is he's the king of thieves, but he's born of the Gerudo, and in the Gerudo lore, there's only a male. It's an all-female race of people, and a male is born like once every century, like once
Yes.
every 100 years. They just have a male. So he's this guy that is born once every century. Like think about how insane that is. Like imagine growing up in a tribe where it's like this is how important you are. There hasn't been one of you in 100 years.
Yeah, he's definitely pretty busy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so he sets out to, take over the sacred realm and get the Triforce, and he becomes, for the first time in the timeline, is Ganon, the Demon King Ganon, not Demon King Demise, Demon King Ganon. So that's another interesting like reason for Ocarina of Time to exist.
Before we get to some more important things, another cool thing is this is the first time we see the Gorons, right? They're kind of like a new race.
Were they in Four Swords and Minish Cap? I don't remember.
Well,
I'm
those
pretty
came
sure
out after, right?
No, well,
they
yeah,
come
yeah,
out
they came out,
afterwards. Yeah,
but
but I don't remember them being in the game. Are they?
Well, they're in Skyward Sword.
who, the Gorons?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. There's the
Oh,
salesman.
there's one Goron, right? There's like one Goron.
There's a couple. There's
There's a
like
Oh,
two or
few.
three.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Oh my god,
oh man,
they're
I
so
actually
funny in that game.
okay, I actually forgot about them.
Yeah. So
Okay,
the most important part of Ocarina of Time in the timeline is that this is when the timeline splits into three different timelines. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not when with time paradox stuff, I am not very good at that. And it's still I don't fully understand it. So David, would you mind breaking down exactly how this split works, or how did this happen, and what is the split exactly?
Okay. So at the end of Ocarina of Time, um, you have Ganon defeated, um, and you have like that scene where you have Link and Zelda, and they're in that like they're in like the Sacred Realm or something, and Zelda sends Link back in time so he can like relive his childhood. Um, Basically, like the act of sending Link back in time and removing him from the continuity, basically, um, it basically causes a situation where the past that Link gets sent back to is kind of incompatible with the time that they're in, and it causes it just causes the timeline to split. Um,
Mhm.
and you have a situation where you have one timeline where Link is just gone, like he basically just vanished out of time. Um, and then you have another timeline where Link basically never does Ocarina of Time. He just like tells Zelda and like tells the king, and they're like, "Okay, we got it." And then Link just like goes off to do Majora's Mask. Um, but like it's that sending Link back in time action that causes it. As for the downfall timeline, that's supposed to be like a what if, like if Link were to lose in the last battle versus Ganon, what would happen? And it's like, all right, well, that would lead into a Link to the Past.
Okay, see, so that was where my main question was, because for me, when I first saw it, and it says in the timeline, the hero is defeated, the seven sages seal Ganon, king of evil, imprisoning war begins, and then yeah, that's the timeline that leads to a Link to the Past. When I
Hmm.
read that, I was like, wait, they mean like, because obviously, like when you play the game, there is no ending where Link is defeated by Ganon. It almost felt like it's like a fourth wall thing where it's like, hey, did you get stuck at the water temple and you
Kind
never
of.
finished it? Because
right.
if you did, this is what happened to the timeline because of you. You didn't finish this game, and now we have this whole other timeline where Link gets stuck in the water temple. He's defeated by Ganon. I think that's such a cool idea though, because you can't really do that in a medium outside of video games where you're like, it's technically because so many different people are playing the game differently. It's like the story didn't end for a lot of people, and we're gonna make a timeline for the people who maybe didn't finish the game, or hypothetically you just lost. You know what I'm saying? Like it, because it doesn't. You don't see Link lose in the game. That doesn't happen. But so it's almost like, wait, why did they put that there? Like, is it supposed to be the people who didn't finish the game? You know what I'm saying? Like, does that
I
make
actually
sense?
hate it.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying. I couldn't
I hate
accept it.
it.
I could not accept that that was the reality.
Because
I'm like this,
if you do that, what's to stop you from just doing that for any game?
yeah,
or
exactly.
like any time he dies at any point ever. You know,
It's like, oh,
it's like,
that's
oh,
another timeline.
Zelda was busy that day and Link couldn't find her. The world ended. You
Yeah.
know,
But I mean, at the same time, if that's the only uh rational way to resolve it, then I guess it has to be true. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
if there's no way to reconcile like A Link to the Past into the Zelda timeline unless Link loses in Ocarina of Time, then I guess that's what happens if Link loses at the end of Ocarina of Time, and it really is just a what if.
for me, when I got the impression that um the Zelda lore in general was something that you should only take game by game. You know, like
Hmm.
they're more self-contained than people like to think they are, but it's fun to connect them. And I think with like the latest update, they said like, ah, just use your imagination or something like that. And there was like there was a an asterisk almost like it doesn't really matter. Like that's like kind of what they implied,
Hmm.
right? And but it is like there are obvious connections, so it's nice to have it laid out. But if they are allowing me to use my imagination, I'm saying that they're wrong.
I do actually like the theory of putting the downfall timeline split, uh, moving it to Minish Cap instead of leaving it at Ocarina of Time.
So explain that theory real quick.
In in the Minish Cap, in the final boss fight with Vati, um, it's basically you start out at the bottom of Vati's palace, which is like in the sky or whatever. And he has Zelda, and he's doing a ritual to steal the light force from Zelda, and the light force is supposed to be um, basically this triangle of like unspeakable, like unlimited power that the Picori or the Minish gave to the Hylians back in the backstory, and Zelda is the one who possesses it at the time. Vati was trying to steal it from Zelda, and you basically have to fight your way up the palace and then beat him. But basically, what's actually happening though is um, if you pay attention, there's three bells that ring as the ritual is progressing. And
Mhm.
when the third bell rings, you actually get a game over. Like Vati succeeds, he absorbs the light force, and you get a game over, like a dedicated game over screen, and you have to reload. And it's not like Ocarina of Time where it's like, oh, you just died. Like it's like this is scripted in. Like there's a special
Right.
sequence where you fail.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
and the idea is if you put it there, you would then move Four Swords into the downfall timeline section, so that Skyward Sword it goes Skyward Sword, Minish Cap, Ocarina of Time, because Four Swords would get moved to the downfall timeline.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's very interesting. Uh,
Wow. So then the split would happen that much sooner. So it would happen. Oh, okay. Interesting. And actually, that makes a lot of sense too, because then it kind of removes the thing we just made fun of about Ocarina of Time, where the whole it kind of does feel a little cheap, where it's like the hero's defeated. It's like, all right, but that wasn't in the game, so it feels like you're doing something outside of the game. But in what you just described is in the context of the game, like it's actually there. It's designed into it. So that's actually a really interesting theory. But um, So at this point, Ocarina of Time splits the timeline, right? Um, so there's one bad timeline where the hero's defeated. That's what we just covered. But then there's two good timelines, two different good ones where the hero's triumphant. So we'll get into those in a minute. We're gonna actually just go down the timeline of the hero's defeated, and that leads to A Link to the Past. And so let's just say Ocarina of Time, Link loses to Ganon. What happens to that Hyrule and those people and Zelda and all of that? Ganon succeeds according to this timeline. And in that timeline, where he succeeds and takes over everything, A Link to the Past takes place. And A Link to the Past, obviously, the GOAT, the greatest game ever made, Super Nintendo, whatever. So it says that the seven sages seal Ganon, king of evil, and this leads to what is known as the era of the imprisoning war, right? So even though Link died, and he failed miserably, and he just got stuck in the water temple, and
Jobber.
and the jobbers,
A pair of jobbers. They're meant for each other.
the two humble jobbers tried to take down Ganon, and he bodied them both. In that timeline, the sages actually succeed in another way of sealing Ganon eventually anyway. But Link is obviously lost in that. And so then that leads to the imprisoning war, which you actually see at the beginning of A Link to the Past. So A Link to the Past, the first game on this dark hero died timeline. And if you remember the beginning of A Link to the Past, it shows, this awesome artwork and like this little prologue where it shows like, okay, there's this king of evil Ganon, and he was sealed away by these seven sages, and then begins A Link to the Past. So this game is kind of the first time that Ganon is resurrected, because obviously Ocarina of Time in the timeline is the first time that you see Ganon in any form in the timeline. So he's he's resurrected. Yeah, you see him in his full pig form and all of that. And the whole A Link to the Past is you reawakening those seven stages so that they can seal him away again. And it's the second time that the Master Sword is used in this. It's the third time that the Master Sword is used in this timeline. The first being Skyward Sword, the second being Ocarina of Time, and then now in A Link to the Past. Is there anything that stands out to you guys about A Link to the Past? David, you can go first.
The backstory presented by A Link to the Past actually doesn't really match Ocarina of Time, which is supposed to be before it. The little prologue basically tells you the story that sometime before the events of this game, Ganondorf and his band of thieves broke into the Sacred Realm. Um, Ganondorf killed all of the other thieves, and he claimed the Triforce, the full Triforce, and he made a wish to conquer the world. And the Triforce basically turned the Sacred Realm into like a dark version of Hyrule for him to like gather his power, and then he would go and conquer Hyrule. But remember, in Ocarina of Time, when Ganondorf broke into the Sacred Realm, when he touched the Triforce, it split. In A Link to the Past, in the backstory, he just got the full Triforce, and he made a wish. The only way that would mesh with Ocarina of Time would be if there's basically an event missing. Say like Ocarina of Time ends, Link dies, Ganondorf has well, I mean, it would have to it would have to you'd have to stretch things, because you basically have to say that Ganondorf killing Link, taking the Triforce from Link and Zelda, would be basically equivalent to breaking into the Sacred Realm and taking the Triforce. But in the backstory to A Link to the Past, the way that it happens is he gets the Triforce. The I forget if it's 6 or 7. It might actually be 6. The 6 sages seal Ganondorf inside the Sacred Realm. They basically just trap him inside, and like that's where he was. Like he didn't die. He was just locked in the Sacred Realm until until Link finally did what he did. Um, but yeah, like the backstory is just like it doesn't match.
Right. And it's interesting because I actually thought, at first, I thought it did match, because I thought what happened was that they sealed him in the Sacred Realm, but the Triforce is in the
Right.
Sacred Realm. So I thought that that's how he got it. But I don't think that's the way it works, because it clearly it's split, like you mentioned in Ocarina of Time. And so when you see it, when it says here in the heroes defeated timeline, it says the 7 stages seal away Ganon. Somehow he gets the full Triforce after that point, and that leads into A Link to the Past. And you're right, it's what creates the Dark World and the Light World that you play through in that
I would
game.
actually say
Well,
that Ganon. I
Hungry,
think Ganon has the Triforce by the time that he's sealed away. Because I
here's
think.
the thing, right? It's like
Mhm.
it doesn't make much
oh
sense
yeah,
because if Link is defeated, let's say that Link's defeated, and that's how you get to that part of it, right?
Also, wouldn't they mention that?
Right? But Zelda is clearly still alive
right.
if the 7 sages seal him away, because she's the 7th sage, right?
True.
So,
Then how would he
so
have her Triforce piece then,
Right,
exactly,
right?
right.
exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. That doesn't really work that way.
Oh. Well, the other interesting thing about this that we should mention is that after the events of Ocarina of Time, it's actually impossible to kill Ganon, because um, once he touched the Triforce in the Sacred Realm in Ocarina of Time and he got the Triforce of Power, there was no way to actually kill him. Like, he is actually like invincible, and you'll see him reappear many times in the timeline and in different timelines, like, or whatever. He can't really be defeated. Like, the only thing they can do is seal him away, and the Master Sword is the only thing
Which
that
is
weakens him
interesting
enough where they can
because
seal him away.
it's
So
if we believe that that's true, right?
And it's
And
not.
it's not, right? Because if you, that's why I had my theory of Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 being uh kind of their own separate
What
thing,
the
right?
heck is a silver arrow?
Right? The silver arrows overdo it, right? And he dies in Zelda 1, right?
Hmm.
The whole plot of Zelda 2 is him being resurrected, not unsealed or whatever, right?
Yeah, he's dead.
He's dead, and they're trying to bring him back. They're trying to use
oh,
Link's blood to bring him back, which is kind of morbid to think about. But because when you get a game
oh my
over in Zelda
God.
2, it says
Wow.
game over, like Ganon is
Return
resurrected.
of Ganon.
Yeah, something like that. And you go, that iconic laugh.
And do you know why that's
Right.
happening? It's because they canonically the way that works is in Adventure of Link they need Link's blood in order to perform a ritual to resurrect Ganon.
Yeah,
So when Link dies,
they
Ganon
take
gets
his blood.
resurrected.
They take his blood.
Yeah, that's insane. So after A Link to the Past, right, it ends with at the end, Link actually gets the Triforce at the end of A Link to the Past. And this whole split world is brought back to one, and the Dark World is done, and Ganon is sealed away at the end of that game. And then we go into the next game on the timeline right after A Link to the Past. Again, we're still in the heroes defeated timeline, so if you're following along, like, we'll tell you when we jump to the other 2 splits, but right now we're just on this one split where Link died in Ocarina of Time or did not beat Ganon. So at the end of A Link to the Past, this Link, this exact same Link, this is like the first time in the timeline. Actually, I think it might be the second time where, yeah. So it's the second time in the timeline where canonically the same Link is playing into a different game, because usually it's been a different Link. Like, Skyward Sword is the first Zelda game in this timeline, but that Link is not in any other. That Link from that adventure, he is in no other Zelda games as of yet. The Minish Cap and Four Swords Link is the same, and then Ocarina of Time is a new Link, and in A Link to the Past is a new Link, and then that Link goes into Link's Awakening. So at some point, he gets onto a boat, leaves Hyrule, and the beginning of the game is him, on some kind of ship in the middle of the ocean, and he hits a storm, and he becomes shipwrecked, and or does he? And he's on this new island. He's on this new island called Koholint, and he must awaken the windfish in order to get back home. So that takes place after A Link to the Past. It's awesome too, because if this is the same Link from A Link to the Past, this is like one of the most badass Links in all of Zelda, and he's just like, now he's on a whole nother adventure, and like, it's so cool that it's like he's already legendary for what he did in the other game, and now he's on this completely new adventure on a new island. So is there anything what is there anything that makes this game, Link's Awakening, important in the timeline? It's actually, by the way, just full disclosure, I'm pretty sure, David, you said this is your favorite Zelda game. This is like my number 2 or number 3 favorite Zelda. Link's Awakening is godlike. I love it.
Mm-hmm. It's my first Zelda game, so um, but yeah, the Link to the Past Link is like the most traveled Link like ever. He's been to so many places. Um, the
If
canonically
you believe that.
what's if you believe that canonically what's going on here is at the basically at the end of A Link to the Past, after Ganon's defeated, Link just like sets off to train for like the manual says to train for new calamities, basically to train for like the return of Ganon or something. um but uh going back to the BS Zelda games, there's the other BS Zelda, the Ancient Stone Tablets game. That takes place 7 years after A Link to the Past, and it is Ganon's return. And the game tells you that the hero is not around, like they can't find him. Um, and there's a little enemy, the little from Minish Cap, the boss we're talking about, the little choo choo guy or whatever his name is. There's one of those in Link's Awakening, or in Ancient Stone Tablets, and he says something like
Oh,
the hero is asleep or the hero can't wake or something like that. Um, but like canonically, I think what's going on is Ancient Stone Tablets is canon, like it did happen, and it happened at the same time as Link's Awakening.
that's really interesting. But you're not playing as Link in that
It's
game,
not a
though.
Link; it's your Satellaview avatar. It's a hero from a different dimension.
Yeah, he's got like a baseball cap and everything.
Yeah,
Right. So,
but whatever.
uh, then at the end of Link's Awakening, right, you awaken the Windfish, and it awakens Link, which is why it's called Link's Awakening. Because the spoiler for that is that he was shipwrecked and he was trapped in his dream, and he had to wake up from the dream. And the game is you playing through his dream to wake him up,
It's
which
all
is
real.
just so. Oh my god, it's
It's
amazing,
all
man!
real.
It's all real. Is it?
Yes.
If you believe that,
Yeah.
Yes, of course it's real.
if you believe that,
Yeah, I mean, it has to be real in some capacity
if you
because
believe
it's
that.
not simply a dream. Like, but it's really cool because I remember. So in Link's Awakening, it's you see like Mario Universe stuff. Like, there's a chain chomp, there's Goombas, there's like mushrooms
There's
and stuff.
Kirby.
There's Kirby,
Anti
yeah.
Kirby's.
There's so many weird things, and the way to explain it was that this is not part of Hyrule or the Zelda universe. This is in Link's mind, and that's also why at the end of the game, the final boss takes the form of Ganon, but it isn't Ganon, and it's almost implied that, like, this is Link's greatest fear, like, taking form, and it wasn't literally Ganon, but it was the same shape and move set. And obviously, if he is the same Link from A Link to the Past, it makes sense. Also,
Little did
this
he
game,
know. Little did he know that in the BS Zelda games, his worst nightmares are coming true.
Hey, I mean,
and
it sucks to be Link.
Right?
How embarrassing.
Nick is not a very well treated character in many different Zelda games.
wait
Jobber.
until we get to the ultimate sad Link adventure that comes up
Yeah, we're
later.
talking about it later.
But so yeah, though what's interesting too is that this game also did come out right after A Link to the Past. So it's a direct sequel with the exact same Link, and it makes sense that those two worlds are connected the way that they seem to be. Then
Same
after
cover
that,
art, basically.
oh yeah, right, exactly. And then right after that, we have Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, and it's basically this adventure is in two other lands, and it's kind of like why you were saying that, like, this is the most traveled Link. Like, this is like he's been to like 3 or 4 different giant locations at this point in this exact one Link. This is like the most tortured Link in all of Zelda
Well,
history.
he's not tortured. He's doing this on his own accord. You know.
That's actually true. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of I was bringing up before.
If you believe that.
If you believe that, right? He saves the world, right? Successfully. There's no question about it, right? He gets the Triforce, right? Puts it back. I don't want it, right?
Well, he did use it.
All right,
Oh,
but
right, he used it. Yeah,
it's like he doesn't like try to conquer the world, right? He is
yeah,
a bona fide hero, right? And then when
yeah,
he's done, he's like, "I'm not finished yet. Let's go explore it and
yeah.
prepare." You know,
Let's go save every other land and other problems. And I mean, think about it. If you were the Link from A Link to the Past, right?
he could have
You wake up,
retired. He could have retired.
dude. If you wake up, right, and you're like, oh, my uncle's missing. Where is he? And it's raining outside, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go to the castle, and you go, and he's dead in the basement of the castle. Like the beginning of the game, you find your uncle just dead, and he's just like, oh, I was in here, like you gotta save Zelda or whatever, and so he ends up going from that to being a kid in the bed who just saw his uncle die. This is like Batman basically. He just becomes the greatest hero of that land and bodies everyone. If I was that guy, I would be so confident that I could go anywhere and just body anybody. I'd be like, dude, I'm gonna go everywhere and body any problem that you guys have. I'm
And he
gonna solve
does, if you believe that.
it. He
Yeah, and he
does.
does.
If you believe that.
So, is there anything interesting about Orc of Ages and Seasons in terms of like the timeline? Is there any unique lore or anything about those games?
Well, it's the first time we really get to see another country for
Oh, right,
like properly. Um,
right,
two whole new like basically just separate kingdoms,
right. Yeah.
which is pretty cool. We get to see some cool new races like the Subrosians who like live under the ground, like underground.
Hmm.
Maybe they built all the stuff in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. I don't know.
There you go.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another game with time travel with the harp, and I don't know. Somehow that didn't break anything, I guess. So that's cool.
They were
Yeah.
more prepared.
No one,
I guess
Link didn't
so.
die in this one.
Well, they didn't have Zelda around to ruin it.
There you go. One less jobber.
Zelda is just a liability with time travel.
Yeah. So much wisdom. Still can't handle time travel.
There,
Just a
there are
little
people
time travel.
who say that the Link in this game isn't actually the same one as A Link to the Past.
I've heard that before too.
Some people place it between A Link Between Worlds and The Legend of Zelda 1, and some people place it after The Adventure of Link.
Right.
And some place it in the adult timeline because of the ocean and stuff like that.
Oh, wow, interesting. Yeah, so then after this game it says the Triforce splits. So I'm assuming that they're referencing, okay, A Link to the Past, Link obtains the Triforce at the end of the game. He sets that world right. He ends the dark world, light world dichotomy thing that they have going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, the Triforce splits again. It doesn't say how, and Oracle of Ages and Seasons don't really talk about the Triforce much. So it's not contained in that game.
Well, the Triforce actually gives you your quest. Like the Triforce talks to you.
Oh, at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
know.
that's
I don't know
right.
what that was all about. I don't know what the deal with that was, but the
Yeah, I mean,
Triforce spoke to
honestly,
you.
I played the Oracle games when I was a little kid,
It's kind of weird.
and I don't remember a lot about it. You know.
It's in that very first cutscene where you see Link on a horse, right?
Yep.
Yeah, right. And it's very much like the intro to Link's Awakening. It's drawn very similarly, very similar art style. But
Anyway,
yeah, actually, I completely forgot about that. That's interesting. So at some point, that Triforce that was just talking to you goes, "Yo, dude, I got to split," and then he splits into a bunch of different.
I'm
He
out.
splits into pieces. I'm out. And then we have A Link Between Worlds. And I actually, so it makes sense to me that this is a new Link and not like going back to what you said earlier, where some people don't think that the same Link from A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening is the same from Oracle Seasons and Ages, because I don't think the Link from A Link Between Worlds is the same Link. It's like,
It's not.
it's not like it can't be the same exact area because it's a similar area to A Link to the Past, but it's not the same, and it can't be the same Link. Otherwise, where would his stuff be? Like, wouldn't
Yeah.
he have already solved this problem? It doesn't even make a reference to it. Like,
I'd
there's
certainly
no
say it was his descendant, though.
exactly. That's kind of what it feels like. Yeah,
It's
Same
the
yeah,
same
house.
house.
yeah. So Lorule invades Hyrule in A Link Between Worlds. So it's interesting because somehow after Link solves the split Dark World thing from A Link to the Past, it is somehow there's like still this other mirrored version of Hyrule that exists that is very similar to the Dark World earlier in the timeline, and it's called Lorule. And the Triforce returns to Hyrule's sacred
So
realm
let
at
me
the
get
end of
this straight though. This is not the same world. This is a different. This
Di-
is a different. Lorule is completely
different world,
separated.
different world.
Yeah,
It's separate from the Dark Realm.
exactly. It's separate, but obviously it looks very similar, but it is separate.
You have the same theme song.
Yeah,
What's up with
has
that?
those same like tentacle monsters, those creepy ass monsters.
Yeah.
The Dark World in A Link to the Past is the corrupted sacred realm, whereas Low Rule is like closer to Termina, as it's like a parallel dimension or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not inherently like evil. It's literally just a
Upside down.
darker. Yeah, it's just an inverted parallel universe.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
lot of interesting things in that its own world of Link being a coward. Like
yeah,
um, uh, Hilda.
Hilda instead of Zelda.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's like aggressive, right?
yeah,
She's not like the peaceful Zelda.
She's
So
like
yeah,
manipulative.
yeah,
yeah. So she's the opposite of a jobber. She's purposely doing the job
I
bad.
don't know, man.
She did all right.
She did all
She did
right
all
for
right.
herself, but it was to her because of her.
I
Yeah,
don't really know if the whole like opposite virtues thing. I don't know if that was like I don't know if it was always like that, because you know how like they basically wished away their Triforce. I don't know
yeah.
if like that's when they became cowardly, or like was it always like that?
Yeah, and it's funny because so the big twist in that game is in the beginning of the game, Link is met with by Ravio, and Ravio is this guy who has all these weapons and all these items that you have in classic Zelda games, and he's like, "Oh, I'll rent them to you." And he's this guy wearing a bunny suit, a purple bunny suit. So
Interesting.
later on, you find out that you're throughout the game you're meeting the inverted like parallel universe version of every character. So there's Zelda in the main universe, and then there's Helda in the low rule universe, and you're constantly meeting everyone's like parallel double, right? And when I was playing the game, I never even thought like, wait, wouldn't Link have a double? And of course his double ends up being Ravio. You find out at the end of the game, and it's so cool because in A Link to the Past, when Link is transformed, when he's sent to the Dark World for the first time, he takes the form of a bunny. And so that's where Ravio's outfit comes from. It's a reference to that.
Which is
And
interesting in
so,
itself that
yeah,
in Links to the Past, I wonder why they chose a bunny. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's not a random decision. It's like, just make him a
Why not
bunny.
a wolf?
Something like
yeah,
that, right?
right.
Something that's more like associated with courage and bravery or heroism,
Heroism, yeah,
right?
right.
It's he's a bunny. He's a little cute bunny.
Yeah.
Tries his best.
So I ended up liking Lonk, the alternate universe Link.
Long.
Like at first, I was like, "Oh, he's not the courageous Link," and that's why there's all these problems. But he's this item salesman, which is really really cool.
Yeah,
He redeems himself
Yeah, he does.
for sure.
absolutely.
And then we have the next game in that timeline. After Link Between Worlds, we have Triforce Heroes. The royal family uses the Triforce. Prosperity gives way to decline, with Hyrule reduced to a small regional power. So that's an interesting thing because that right there, that little sentence after Triforce Heroes and in between the next game and Triforce Heroes, it's basically saying the royal family uses the Triforce and it basically fixes everything, and prosperity gives way to decline with Hyrule reduced to a small regional power. So it's almost like saying like things were going really well, and all that prosperity meant like a decline for their civilization, and like that's such a weird sentence in the timeline. Like
Yeah,
you could almost make like 20 games just in that, right? Like
it's a
how
little weird. Um,
yeah.
like
What do you guys think of that?
so, uh, in Legend of Zelda, the NES game, the the royal family basically controls the Triforce. Like, I don't think they're like using it constantly, but basically like the royal family like is like watching over it and they're guarding it, rather than it being like split with three people, or like kept in the sacred realm. Like I think it was like kept like in the castle.
Right.
Um and yeah, I don't like somehow somehow Hyrule crumbles between A Link Between Worlds and Zelda 1, and it's not really explained how. It's just Ganon came back and people weren't ready and they got bodied. Kind of like in Breath of the Wild. Like it's just another calamity. The
Right.
calamity struck, they weren't ready, they lost.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that it's in the first Zelda game, the Triforce pieces are all in places where they're not sealed away. You know, they're kind of just in these dungeons, right?
Hmm.
They're not like behind some magical barrier or in a different realm. They're just out in the open,
Just
basically.
chilling in a chest.
Yeah, right. So that kind of gives credence to what they're saying that the family was kind of using it, right?
Yeah, like the family, the best they could do is hide them in these dungeons with these like, very elementary traps in
Yeah,
them. Like it's obviously not like a sacred
Yeah.
realm or anything.
yeah. So what is interesting is maybe the use of the Triforce like repeatedly is kind of what brings Ganon back, right? It could be right, like some sort of like demise curse, right? And then like
Yeah.
that kind of like sets it off almost. Does that
I
make any
Yeah.
sense?
Not really. Uh, I think
I'm just trying to spitball things here, so I
I
don't know.
think I think the deal with Ganon reviving is I think it's unrelated to Triforce usage, and I think it's really just a case of whenever Hyrule like gets its act together, that is always the moment when Ganondorf resurrects. It's like it's almost funny how it's like clockwork. Every time Hyrule is able to finally reach stability, Ganon resurrects, he knocks them down, and then they have a period of destruction, period of rebuilding, and then a golden age, and then rinse and repeat. And it's just like over and over. And I think it's just destiny. Like it's literally that. It's just like the curse mentioned in Skyward Sword. It's just reality.
Right. Yeah. And so this is all taking place in the first Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda on the NES. And it says here that Ganon returns, but he is defeated, which is obviously what you played through in the game. And the hidden Triforce of Wisdom is located. So in that game you collect the Triforce, right?
Well,
And it's
only two pieces for some
only
reason.
two. Right. Does it and I'm assuming Ganon is the third piece. So you collect
No,
the wisdom
Ganon
and
has
courage.
does Ganon actually have the Triforce of Power? I don't know, but the Triforce of Courage isn't seen in that game. It's only in the Adventure of Link where Link finds it. It's just two pieces in the first
Oh,
Zelda game.
interesting.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
kind of
Okay.
strange. You have the Triforce in the first Zelda game, and there's two pieces. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah. That's interesting. And then yeah, so then that leads to Adventure of Link, and that's the final game in the Hero is Defeated timeline. This whole time that you've been listening, we've just been in the timeline of games after Link in Ocarina of Time loses. And Adventure of Link is the final one. We kind of talked about it a little bit where they're trying to resurrect Ganon using Link's blood. And this game is very, very. It has so many. This is one of the most. This is probably the most unconventional Zelda game in the whole series, like in a lot of different ways. So it says the ancient Princess Zelda returns, and the hidden Triforce of Courage is found. So just like you said, the Triforce of Courage is not in the original Legend of Zelda, but it's found in Adventure of Link. Is there any other important notes in the timeline that regard Adventure of Link?
The right word says one of the best games ever made, right there. That's part of the timeline.
In my opinion, this is the first Souls game. It's based on combat. It has the same like structure of like I feel like the people who made the Souls games, they were like, let's just make Legend of Zelda 2 in 3D. And that's kind of what those games are. They're hard and they're just like the same combat type of thing. And that's not a diss. Like those
Yeah.
games are awesome.
Hmm.
That's actually a compliment. But as far as the timeline and the lore, does anything jump out about Adventure of Link that we didn't already cover?
Um, well, it's got a pretty big map. The the actual map in a Link or Adventure of Link is actually pretty big, and I think there's even like a place called like Maze Island or something. It's like this whole. It's hard to tell how big it is because it's like they had to draw the map to scale to include like you know a minimum tile size, so it's like it looks bigger than it really is. But
Right.
besides for like Breath of the Wild, I feel like that was like actually one of the bigger maps.
Yeah, right.
Interesting thing about that game is all the cities. They're the names of the sages in Ocarina of Time.
There's a reason for that.
Oh, can you explain that?
Uh, so have you heard of an old gaming expo called Space World?
Yes.
Yes.
So there was a cart, an old 1998 Space World cart that was recently dumped that had a bunch of like beta Ocarina of Time stuff on it, and it seems like there's like basically scraps from three different builds, and one of the builds of Ocarina of Time was to be a sequel to Adventure of Link, and the sages were meant to be named references to the towns.
Right. Yeah. And actually, you can look up that footage. There's like some early Ocarina of Time footage that looks nothing like the final game, but it's like the first time they ever showed the game. And Link is very much, he looks like he does in Legend of Zelda 2, like the brown hair and like the same color scheme on his outfit. And I remember in interviews, Miyamoto said that at that time they were considering even making Ocarina of Time first person because it was supposed to be more combat driven
Right.
or like more focused on combat. And that's really the thing that defines Zelda 2 is that in the other Zelda games or like Zelda 1, the enemies are almost just obstacles that are like in your way. But in Zelda 2,
They're
it was
tough.
like, no, they're tough and you need to like the game is focused around you learning how to fight these enemies. And another cool little Easter egg is that Link's entire moveset in Smash Brothers has always been based off of Zelda 2 Link. It's the same, like the down air is the pogo where he puts the
Oh
sword
yeah,
down
you're
beneath
right.
him, and it's like the down tilt is very similar. The jabs are the same because it was like, oh, Sakurai was designing, Link for Smash Brothers. He's like, oh, they already made a move set for him in 2D. It's Zelda 2. The other Zelda games are top down views, so it doesn't really match up as well. But yeah, so Zelda 2, and that is the final game in that timeline.
Which
Now,
may have never happened.
which may have never happened because again, that all is dependent on in Ocarina of Time if Link is defeated or not. And so we move on to the second little part of the timeline. So the second split is the hero wins, but there's two different versions of the hero winning. So in this first version of the hero winning, it's called the child timeline, and it's basically Ganondorf's plot is stopped. So the way that this one works is that when you play Ocarina of Time, right, and you meet Princess Zelda for the first time, so you free the Deku Tree of his problems or whatever, and he sends you to Hyrule Castle. You cross Hyrule Field. Link sneaks into the castle, and he meets Zelda. They're both children, and she tells him that she's been having these visions of like something really bad happening, and she's looking through this window, and she asks you to come look through the window with her so that she can show you something, and you see Ganondorf walk in and bow before the king. And she's like, that guy right there, that's the problem. And I know for sure that he's going to betray us all and he's doing something else. And you're both kids at this time. So in the child timeline, it's basically after Ocarina of Time at the very end of the game, the last frame of the game is that Zelda sends you back in time to live out your childhood. She's like, I feel bad about this whole thing. I'm a jobber. I ruined it. And, now that we defeated Ganon, you need to go back to how things were. Like, I
Let's
can't
ruin
just
it even
leave.
more.
Yeah, let's ruin things even more. And I can't just like let you be this adult that missed his childhood. So I'm going to send you back. So she sends you back, and the last frame of the game before the end credits is Link going back to that courtyard and meeting Zelda. But now it's after the events of that they both know what happened, and they are both children now. And basically stops everything from happening with Ganon in that moment in the window as children by just, it's implied that he just tells them about it and they stop it without it ever, taking place. So in that timeline, we have Majora's Mask, and that is the direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. Again, it's the exact same Link from Ocarina of Time, and the game begins with him and Zelda in the Temple of Time. They're both kids, so it's like it's so cool how it takes place like right after what you just saw in Ocarina of Time. So they somehow stop Ganon as children. They avoid the whole thing as adults, and Link is bummed because dude, this guy is miserable in this universe. Like this Link, I feel so bad for
Punish
because
Link.
he's he's made fun of for not having a fairy, right? He
Yeah, so
finally
his
gets
whole childhood is miserable.
yeah, to the point where there's a drawing outside of his house in the Kokiri Forest of a dinosaur eating a fairy. Like he drew a dinosaur on his little tree stump, and he he finally gets a fairy, and it's actually just the Deku Tree feeling like, yeah, go to this kid and bring him to me or whatever, and then sends him off on this adventure. The adventure ends up ruining his life. Zelda tries to fix it, sends him back to being a kid, but the fairy is like, oh, my job is done. We saved the day. I have to leave. So the fairy leaves, and that's Link's only friend. So what does he do at the beginning of Majora's Mask? After Ocarina of Time, he goes into the Lost Woods to go find his long lost friend. And they show Zelda and him in the Temple of Time. He has his ocarina. She gives it to him. He has a very young Epona, which they don't get into how he got that because you can't ride Epona as a kid in Ocarina of Time. But he gets Epona, and he starts off he goes into the Lost Woods, and he's searching for his long lost buddy. And of course, in the forest, he meets Skull Kid, and the Skull Kid basically bodies him in the middle of the forest, steals his stuff, steals his horse, steals his ocarina, and runs off. And then the adventure of Majora's Mask begins. So, is there anything about what? How is Majora's Mask important in the timeline, or is there any interesting lore or anything that is like unique to Majora's Mask?
Okay, so if this is like an alternate, well, if we, as we understand Majora's Mask, Termina is like a parallel world to Hyrule, right?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so.
And but there is like a gate of sorts, right, to get there.
You mean like so in the beginning of Majora's Mask when he's chasing the Skull Kid, he falls down what looks like this huge gate, like it's like a huge hole into the ground. That's
Yeah,
what you mean by the gate?
yeah,
Yeah.
basically,
Like
right.
It's just a
a
portal.
It's a
yeah,
physical place, right? It's not like a
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a physical place in like a different dimension or something.
yeah.
right.
Like what I'm saying. I'm saying the portal is a physical place in another world, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So first
Well,
of all, that's interesting in
probably.
general because most most of the parallel universe stuff in the Zelda world have always been through magical items, right?
Yeah.
And in this game, it's physical, right? And the people or the race rather who created the Majora's Mask, 'cause the Majora's Mask didn't come from nowhere, right? It was created. It's
Hmm.
from what it's the implication of the game, and that race may actually be in other Zelda games, but I think we could get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, it's I think it's implied that the creators of Majora's Mask were from Hyrule and not from Termina.
And it's
That's my
also
thoughts at least.
yeah, and it's also, the Happy Mask Salesman, he is a core character in Ocarina of Time, right? And in that game, all you know about him is that he's in Castletown, he sells you masks, and that's it. But then he becomes this central character in Majora's Mask because the Skull Kid stole the mask from him, and he ends up telling you you have to get this mask back from the Skull Kid, and that this mask has some kind of supernatural abilities and that it was made by an ancient tribe a long, long time ago. and this is not something that is safe for him to have. So this game is very interesting in the timeline because in a way it's almost like the A Link's Awakening, where it's not necessarily that it's a dream, but there are a lot of there's you can interpret this game a lot of different ways. And one of the common popular ways that it's interpreted as via game theory, which is a famous YouTube channel, is that in Zelda lore, right? In Ocarina of Time, they tell you that anyone who gets lost in the Lost Woods becomes a Stalfos. And the Stalfos are those skeleton creatures that are in all these Zelda games, right? So you actually see that apparently a lot of the Kokiris, it's speculated that in Ocarina of Time, a lot of the Stalfos are Kokiri kids who were lost in the Lost Woods, and they become these skeletons. So Link goes off into the Lost Woods to find his friend, right? And he ends up falling down this hole. And it's strange that this universe of Termina is inhabited by all these people that look exactly like the people from Hyrule that he knows. There's no real new characters. It's like almost all of them are, characters that he's met before.
Yeah.
So it's populated by all these people he knows, right? And it's very strange. Like you said earlier, he's falling through this hole, but it doesn't look like you just fell through a hole, like like a tunnel or something. It's like a giant hole into an abyss, and somehow that leads him to like another city, like almost underground. Like it's very, very supernatural and very weird, and it doesn't make physical sense. And the
It seems like
speculation,
deliberate though too. There's like a
exactly,
pathway leading out from where he landed and stuff.
And then when you
yeah,
go through that path, like the game like twists and turns and shifts, right?
Yeah.
And then
yeah,
straightens out, like
Like gravity is shifting and
yeah,
everything.
something
yeah,
like that. Like it's very like a deliberate like this is not normal. Like
It's like an Alice in
yeah.
Wonderland kind of thing.
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, and the thing about this, I feel like this game, more so than any other Zelda game, all of the story elements and themes of this game seem way more deliberate. Like sometimes when we're talking about the timeline, it's like, oh, what if this is connected to this? And it's like with Majora's Mask, it feels so intentional. It really feels like there's too many things that connect for you not to think that they're real or that intentional from the designers. So the place is called Termina, right? So he goes into this alternate universe, it feels like, and it's called Termina. And the game theory it was really cool because they interpreted it as it meaning terminal, as in meaning like,
End or something.
yeah, or like this is the in-between phase between you passing. Like you're in the terminal. You're in the in-between of like you're on the way out. And Link is actually righting all these wrongs with these people that exist in this world that he kind of knows. And it's very interesting how the game is all about sadness, remorse, loss, and there's many characters in this game that are dead or dying, and the entire world is about to end in these 3 days. There's so much dark stuff, and it feels really deliberate with this game. And it feels like it's almost like it didn't really happen, but it did. And the central theme of the game is also that the Skull Kid, he's possessed. You find out later on that he's possessed by rage because he lost his friends, right? So his friends were the giants, the four giants that you meet, and apparently at some point they turn their back on him, and he becomes this raging like filled dude, and he finds these two fairies, and then he gets the Majora's Mask, and the Majora's Mask make it like powers up that rage into wanting to end the world or whatever. And it's interesting how that ties directly into Link was looking for his friend when he got lost in the forest and encounters the Skull Kid, and they go on this adventure. And at the end of the game, the Skull Kid is restored and he gets his friends back and he's happy.
Well,
And then,
rather he accepts that even though the giants aren't going to be there, that they're still friends. It's not that they abandoned him. It's
right,
just that there's
yeah,
going to be distance between them.
yeah. And so a lot of the game theory is that Link is dying in Termina, right? But the way I interpreted it was actually that it was him. It was almost like you were playing through him processing the loss of his friend and accepting it. And at the end of the game, you see him riding off into the light in the Lost Woods, and it feels like it's almost like, oh, okay, through this whole adventure, which may not have happened, it might have happened like in his mind. He kind of just accepts that he's not going to find Navi, and it's all about accepting loss and accepting that you can't have this person or this thing that you wanted this whole time.
Well,
So that's how I interpreted that whole game.
You want to
well,
hear the counter to that?
wait before we get to that, right?
Okay.
um, I think that even if your theory, the game theory, are correct or
Game
incorrect,
theory.
right? Yeah, right. Um, I think the most important thing is that the game has motifs and themes of death and acceptance and a lot of those things, right? And even if those theories aren't correct, that doesn't mean those themes don't exist within the game, right? I think that's a lot of
Oh,
Right.
for
people.
sure, for sure.
I think that's what a lot of people don't understand when they say like when they give these theories out. It's like those things definitely do exist in the game, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Right.
Sure.
you can go. You were gonna say.
You have characters who are openly, uh, openly accepting that they're about to die.
Or
Like,
not accepting they're gonna die. They're in
right,
fear.
or not. My favorite example is I forget the Treminian names, but Milan, her version in Majora's
Andrew.
Mask. Andrew, right?
No, wait, no, I'm
No,
wrong.
the younger one. Yeah,
Romaji.
Andrew's.
No.
Yeah, Romani, Romani
I
Ranch.
forget. I don't know. But you have that whole sub arc with the aliens and the UFOs and stuff.
Well,
Um,
Yeah.
okay, but they're not actually aliens. They're ghosts that look like aliens. They're
there's something.
spirits. They're spirits.
There's something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're very
Um,
nondescript in how they actually what they actually are.
yeah. But like at the on the third day, well, like I'm pretty sure there's like the whole thing about um Romani or whatever the little girl's name is wanting to have some Chateau Romani, which is like this alcoholic like milk basically. Um,
It's
it's like a
implied to be that way, at
yeah,
least.
it's like their alcohol. I don't know. But
Yeah.
on the last day, her older sister just lets her have it. And she's like melancholy about it. But it's like, you know, keep the innocent innocent. Let them enjoy something before they get killed by the moon.
Yeah. It's the end of the world, and it's like, whatever. Just let her have it because this is all going to hell anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back on the Link is dead theory. Um, when you watch the ending of the game, he has the mirror shield that you get in Termina.
Right. Oh, that's right.
So it can't be just in his head. He has
Wow.
physical items from Termina in Hyrule at the end.
Yeah.
If
My
you believe
God.
that,
If you believe
if you believe that you actually made it back, but that is a good counterpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost like yeah, that's really interesting because the other thing about this is that, and we're gonna get into this with the next game, but this link is, so we mentioned how the Link to the Past link is like the most badass link of all the links. Like he's so traveled, he like stops all these problems across many different lands. Ocarina of Time link is the most depressing link in the story, man, because Ocarina of Time ruins his life. He goes into Majora's
Not
Mask.
wait, not only does he ruin his life, right? He gets to see the failures. You know,
Yeah,
he gets to see Hyrule in this decrepit state. His friends are miserable. You know,
yeah.
like he gets to see the worst of it too. Not only does everything go wrong, he gets to see the full effect of it being wrong.
Yeah, and then he goes into Majora's. He loses his only buddy, which is the fairy that he, completed the adventure with. Goes into Majora's Mask, and he never finds that fairy. And the last shot that we see of this Link in the canon, or maybe not, we'll get to that, is him riding off into the Lost Woods. And the last, I remember seeing the end credits of Majora's Mask recently again, and it's like the last frame is like not this heroic, happy shot. It's a very somber shot of him just like
he's just leaving.
he's just riding off into the forest like whatever, we don't know what's going to happen. And
That sucked.
it's a very sad
Well, that sucked. Back to
like,
looking for
yeah,
that fairy.
very sad way to see that hero end up. But then we get to the next game in the timeline, And again, just to make sure everyone's keeping up, this is in the child timeline where the children in Ocarina of Time stop Ganon from everything and whatever. Twilight Princess. So Ganondorf, King of Thieves, is banished to the Twilight Realm, and the Twilight invade the kingdom of Hyrule. Then Ganondorf returns, but is defeated by Link. So,
It's true.
yeah, this is all facts, by the way. This is all historical facts. So, what's really interesting about Twilight Princess, and why is this game interesting in the timeline?
Well, it introduces several new races. You have the Oka and you have the Twilight, um, which may both be the same people, maybe not. They may be people we've seen before, maybe not. Um, their origins are kind of a mystery. Um, we Ganondorf actually has a cool a cool little backstory in this game because he in the beginning of the game like in the backstory of the game, the sages try and execute Ganon, like just straight up kill him,
Yeah,
and he like it appears like he just gets the Triforce of Power right at that moment, and he like starts to go Ganon, like starts to turn into Ganon, and then
yeah,
they panic and they seal him in the Twilight Realm. Um, and that only happened, in my opinion, because Zelda goofed up and sent Link back in time. Because
explain.
because what it did when Link was sent back in time at the end of Ocarina of Time, he still had his piece of the Triforce. It was still split up among the three. When Link left that timeline, the Triforce of Courage in that timeline shattered. It left Link because Link left that continuity. The Triforce of Courage left Link and it shattered into 8 pieces, and you had to recollect it in Wind Waker.
Right.
When Link showed up in the Child timeline, he has a Triforce of Courage. You can see it on his hand in the end, like in the end sequence. So basically, what is said to have happened is when Link went back in time, as soon as Link went back in time, like arrived in that new time, the Triforce forcibly split because Link was supposed to have the Triforce of Courage. And as soon as that happened, Zelda would have gotten her Triforce piece, and Ganon would have gotten his. And he had no idea until he was about to be killed, and it awakened. And that's why it's called the divine prank in the games, because like, why did this even happen? How did you even have this? And it's all because of how Ocarina of Time ended.
Right. Interesting. And also, so this is the same Ganon from Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, same guy.
Right. So this is again like this is a different Link, different Zelda. This is many, maybe centuries later, but this is the first time that we see the exact same Ganondorf, the human form of Ganon before he, becomes the monster. This is the first time we've seen him in another game as well, according to the timeline. There's another example later on, but yeah, this is the same Ganon from Ocarina of Time.
Probably
He
like
is
15 years older than what we saw in Ocarina of Time,
Yeah,
just
he looks
by
much older.
visuals.
Right, exactly. So the reason why I didn't say that this is the last time Majora's Mask was the last time we saw that Link riding off into the forest is because one of the coolest things in the whole Zelda timeline to me is how I was playing through Twilight Princess, and as you're playing through the game, there is like this weird, like new other dimension that you go into. You see like this ghost looking wolf, right? And when you
Hmm.
see him, he takes you into like this white, cloudy dimension, and this giant skeleton comes out with a sword and shield, and he teaches you like new techniques. He's teaching you the techniques of like the ancient hero. And he's also left handed. He
Ooh,
holds the sword with the left
coincidence.
hand. And of course, infamously, every Link except for the Skyward Sword Link is left handed up until this point in the timeline. And this is a very purposeful and very like this is not even speculation. Like it's very much intended by the designers that Stalfos Link that teaches you all that stuff is the Link from Majora's Mask. And he gets stuck in the forest and he becomes a Stalfos, and he's the guy that teaches you all these sword techniques in Twilight
Yeah,
Princess.
this is the why he's the most like punished Link. Not only he doesn't even get to have like an ending of death, like release. You know, he's like forced to be a Stalfos for like X like amount of years forever. Like he
I
has
actually
no.
don't think he's a Stalfos.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely an interpretation thing, but
Yeah,
if you believe
if
that,
you believe that.
if you believe that he's the Stalfos, which is, it's very very hinted at that he is.
Yeah.
And it's like a pretty horrible fate to have.
Yeah, and Twilight Princess is actually one of the coolest games in the series when it comes to the lore stuff. One of the other interesting things is this is the first time we see the Twilight in any of the Zelda games. But if you look at the timeline, the Twilight are actually the first race that you see, like really in the early text of the timeline. Like if you look, it's creation, then Skyward Sword, and then banishment of the Twilight,
Hmm.
and then the Minish Cap. So the Twilight have existed in the sacred realm or wherever they were banished to, and part of the canon of Twilight Princess is that Ganon is sealed away at the end of Ocarina of Time, right? In this timeline where the children stop Ganon successfully, he's sealed away, and it's basically said that he's sealed away in the same place that the Twilight are, and he uses the Twilight to break free and to cause all the problems that are in Twilight Princess, which is
It's
really really cool.
it's actually said that the Twilight race's hatred was so powerful that Ganon was able to just feed off of it for long enough that he was powerful enough uh to come back, basically,
Right.
to break out.
Yeah. Is there anything else about Twilight Princess in terms of lore or in terms of interesting theories that really stands out?
Well, the
Um,
interlopers are like an interesting thing.
Explain that.
So basically, they're kind of these like sorcerers or something. They were fighting for the Triforce as well, in that time period. The interlopers, I think, I might be getting this wrong, but they were the ones that got sealed into the Twilight Realm.
yeah.
Am I correct on that?
Hmm.
And they're the ones that are creating all these mystical powers, like the so Midna in the game has like this helmet of sorts, right? That gives her power.
The fused shadow.
Yeah, and the interlopers are the ones that created it. And I'm not saying that this is correct or even that I believe it, but it's an interesting way to think about it. Is that some people have speculated that the things in Majora's Mask are creations of the interlopers.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah,
The creepy headgear.
it's an interesting thought for sure.
And
Wow.
I'm not even saying that's right. I'm just saying that's interesting to think about.
Yeah, right.
I think it's plausible.
Interesting. Yeah. So then in Twilight Princess, right, we have this character that they introduced at the beginning named Midna, right? Now, Midna is in an imp form. So she is, it's almost like the low rule and the dark world stuff that we talked about earlier. In this timeline, it takes the form of the Twilight Realm as opposed to it being like Hyrule and low rule. And Midna is almost like, she's almost like the Zelda of that. She's the Twilight Princess. She's the
Yeah, pretty
princess of
much.
the Twilight. And so Ganon and taking over that realm, he basically shatters the fused shadow, and he turns her into an imp, or someone from the Twilight turns her into an imp. Is it
It's us.
confirmed?
It's Zant.
It's Zant,
Yeah,
right? Okay. Oh, right, because Zant is using Ganon. Ganon's using
he's the
Zant to take
usurper
over.
king. He
Yeah.
dethroned her.
Right. And so he becomes the king of the Twilight, and she becomes this imp form. And so you're helping her in the game get the fused shadow back, and then you take over Zant. You actually kind of beat Zant a little bit early in the game, because then you find out that the real bad guy is Ganondorf. The whole time you thought it was Zant, and then you find out that Ganondorf he's the one who's controlling Zant, and he's literally a puppet in this game.
Oh wait, one thing I wanted to say about Twilight Princess, my bad, is the when Midna returns to the Twilight Realm, right? The gate that she goes through is like it looks like the same kind of gate that's in Skyward Sword when Link goes back in time.
It certainly looks
Yes.
similar.
Yeah, so it's definitely like especially
Yeah.
when he's actually walking through it, right?
Yeah.
So the interlopers are very like it could be like the interlopers could have been like a split from the Sheikah almost, because the Sheikah are the ones that created the time gate in Skyward Sword. So it's interesting to think about,
There's some interesting theories going around in the circle of people that I talked to about this, that the interlopers were basically a combination of like Sheikah and Gerudo, and like maybe like some forest dwellers or something. That's kind of a rabbit hole, but like basically it's like Sheikah and Gerudo basically. But like a lot of the Twilight Realms technology like looks like Sheikah stuff, like glowing orbs and like schematic looking light designs, and like it just looks like Sheikah stuff.
Did they ever in Skyward Sword? So that's the first game in the timeline, but it's also the first time canonically that there's any kind of time travel because there is some time
Yeah,
travel in that game. Did they ever? So Impa is guarding the that stone that turns into the time machine,
right.
and it's implied they don't really tell you exactly where that time machine came from. Did they ever like detail that? Because it would be very interesting if it was the same exact the thing that becomes the mirror that they time traveled through in Twilight Princess. I mean, the pattern is so similar. Like it's almost
Well,
the exact same pattern.
they don't time travel through the mirror. The mirror is only it
Oh, it's a portal to the Twilight Realm.
yeah, it honestly it more closely resembles the Dark Mirror in Four Swords Adventures, where it's basically a portal to a different dimension. But it
Mm,
is similar to the Gate of Time in the sense that um, within the Zelda universe, what really is a different timeline other than just a different dimension that
yeah,
resembles the other one? So it's like, Gate of Time is just a portal that brings you to a different dimension that looks like Hyrule,
right.
whereas the mirror is just like a different dimension. So like they're two different kinds of the same umbrella type of artifact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So then
Lots
we
of
have
lots of portals.
lots of portals. Yeah, lots of alternate universes and portals. So the final game in the child timeline, and we're actually almost done with the entire timeline as a whole. The final game in this split is the Four Swords Adventures, and that is where Ganondorf is reincarnated as Demon King Ganon. The demon Vati returns but is defeated. Link seals away Ganon using the Four Sword.
If
So
you
it's
believe that.
interesting because if you believe any of this, yeah, if you believe it. So what's interesting is that so earlier we talked about the Minish Cap and Four Sword and how the Four Sword came to be and all that. That was before the timeline split. So this is the only time that we see a return of Vati and the Four Sword from before the timeline split. And yeah, that is just really cool. Like they brought that character back, and the Four Sword is actually powerful enough to seal away Ganon. Because before this, one
Somehow.
of the things you'll
Somehow.
yeah somehow because one of the things you'll notice is
Yikes.
in no other every other time that you see Ganon, they need the Master Sword to seal him away. But in this thing, the Master Sword was not needed. Twilight Princess is the last time they used the Master Sword in this timeline. Is there anything interesting about Four Swords Adventures in terms of lore or the timeline or anything?
Yeah, it makes no sense putting it after Twilight Princess.
Explain.
Um, there's a new Ganondorf, for one. Um, uh, the lore doesn't really follow up. Like, you have the Dark Mirror, which is very similar to the Mirror of Twilight, and you have a race of people called the Zuna who were like trapped within the mirror as well, in the same way that the interlopers were, but they're different. Like this happened twice apparently. Like
Mm,
apparently twice in Hyrule's past, there was a dark sorcery tribe that tried to take over the world, or the Sacred Realm or Hyrule, whatever, got sent through a mirror to a different world, and then it happened again. And on top of that, Four Swords Adventures is like the same Link as Four Swords. Like it's implied that it's the same guy.
Right.
So it's like, what's going on here? What is this doing over here?
And
And
it's also just funny to think about, like, my man Vaddy was just chilling for like
right,
thousands of years. He was
Yeah.
like, "Yep, just gotta wait for that resurrection."
there's no reason why this should be separated. The only reason why it's not back up where Four Swords is because it's Ganondorf. You can't have Ganondorf show up
Oh,
before Ocarina of Time, because Ocarina of Time is where Ganondorf shows up.
wow. That's what I was
It's
about to
it's a
ask. Is like
whole
why?
separate origin story.
Right. So they run into this problem at this point where, yeah, it's fine that it's Ganondorf, but it doesn't make sense that it's Vati and Link and the Four
Uh
Sword.
oh, we messed up.
Uh oh.
Like, if you were to try and fix this, the best way to fix it would be just to never include Ganondorf. You would just have Ganon right from the outset, maybe, or not even, because Ganondorf dies at the end of time. It can't go here.
Yeah, and also
It
at the
doesn't
end of
doesn't belong
Twilight
here.
Princess, at the end of Twilight Princess, you defeat him as in his human form, not in the beast form. So it's like they were stuck with putting him as a human. It just doesn't make any sense.
Like, it's possible. It's
Yeah.
possible because you know we know that the Gerudo have a male every 100 years, and yes, it's plausible that after Ganondorf is straight up killed, um, that another Ganondorf could be born. But like, I don't actually think that's how it works. If you look at like if you look at all the Ganondorfs, it's still the same one dude. It's never actually a new guy.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think that Four Swords Adventures, I don't know if that's the intention, is that a previously defeated Ganondorf reincarnated as another original Ganondorf who has no memories of being Ganondorf
Right.
before.
And also now he loses to the Four Sword. So it's like, wow, man, I got
Yeah.
demoted. I thought you needed the Master Sword. Apparently, you just need some Four Sword. Like, what is that?
But I'll tell you what, everything fixes itself if you split the timeline at Minish Cap.
Right.
It all
Yeah.
fixes itself. Because Four Swords Adventures is the perfect prequel to A Link to the Past. It lines up perfectly, but it can't go before Link to the Past on this timeline, because it would be where Ocarina of Time is. Four Swords Adventures is a parallel to Ocarina of Time in the Downfall timeline, in my opinion.
Right. Right. That makes sense. So that is the last game in what is called the child timeline. Ganondorf's plot is stopped, and Link and Zelda defeat Ganon, stop his plot as children. In the courtyard, they just tell the king. The king is like, yo, just body this guy.
Straight up.
Straight up. 3-0.
Off with his
Yeah.
head.
Yeah. So then the last split in the timeline is the adult timeline.
The
And
original timeline.
this is the original timeline. This is the one that is the most intuitive. If you played Ocarina of Time, it's like, okay, you beat the game. And so the first game on this timeline is the Wind Waker. And in the beginning of the Wind Waker, the prologue, the famous, amazing prologue of that game, which is just the art style, the music, dude, that was just so awesome. The beginning of that game, they basically tell you, there was a hero in this. There was a Ganon, and he was taking over Hyrule, and there was a hero who stopped him, right? And basically, it's implied that it's Ocarina of Time that they're talking about. But then they're like, oh, the he was sealed away. This Ganon, this enemy, this problem, he was sealed away,
Hmm.
and there was a brief period of peace and calm. But then he came back, and there was no hero. And obviously, we know now that that's because that Link got sent back in time to be a kid. So now there's this timeline where Link doesn't exist and Ganon comes back, and that leads to the Wind Waker. And so they said that to stop the him coming back, they had to flood the entire land of Hyrule had to be flooded to stop this Ganon
Sucks to suck.
because there was no hero there. So Hyrule is completely flooded, right? And that
Oh, dude,
imagine,
every hero, or like god being in the Zelda universe, they're horrible at their jobs. They're just like, you know what? Just take everybody down with them.
It's like
yeah,
the past ritual of Link to the Past, but they had no sages. So they were
yeah,
like, "Whoa, what now?"
All the sages
ye-
are dead. What are we gonna
And they're
do?
like, "What it?"
yeah. So they flood the land, and now it's this giant ocean, and we have the Wind Waker. So Ganon is revived and defeated by Link in this game. And it again, this is the same Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time,
Same
in his
dude.
human form. It's the same dude. So Ganondorf seems to be the only consistent character in the Zelda universe where it's always the same guy, unless Breath of the Wild 2 decides to change that, which we'll get into in a bit. So yeah, Hyrule is washed away, and its people all set out for a new land. So, is there anything about Wind Waker that is like it stands out in terms of the lore and all that stuff?
There's a few things. Um, the when you go down back to the surface of Hyrule, Hyrule Castle is actually moved. It is no longer where it was in Ocarina of Time because it was Ganon's castle. They had to remake Hyrule Castle and they make it on Lake Hylia. It's like,
Oh,
you know,
that makes so much
they had to
sense.
rebuild because their castle was destroyed.
Oh my god, that is amazing because I remember when I first played that game, and of course, the halfway point of the game, the big revelation that you get is like you're on this ocean the whole game, and then they're like, Hyrule was washed away, whatever, just erase it from your memory, it's gone. You're playing the game, and you're like, all right, there's no Hyrule. And then you halfway through the game, they bring you underwater
It's all
into
there.
Hyrule Kingdom, and it's all there. And I remember thinking, oh, why is like Hyrule Castle now like on this big lake? Like I remember noticing the lake very specifically. And you see Ganon's Tower is like a separate place that's across, like it's a little ways from Hyrule Castle.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's so cool. Like I never even thought about that. Of course, they'd have to rebuild it at the end of Ocarina of Time, and in this timeline, this is the timeline where Adult Link
Right.
bodies Ganon. The end of that game is you leaving the castle as it's exploding. Like
Yeah.
the end of the game, it's in rubble. So it makes complete sense that Ganon and the Hyrule family would have to remake the both castles. Actually,
That kind of is interesting to think about because what I was saying before about the Zora, right? That they in this game, the Zora do not exist, right? They become the Rudo, right?
the
Yeah.
Rito,
They're either gone, like,
or they evolved.
or they evolved,
The
or they're
implication
just
is that
not
they
seen.
evolved, right? The implication is that they evolved,
Yeah.
right? So their natural home is Lake Hylia. So
Oh wow,
if you go by what you're saying, the the people of Hyrule were like, "You gotta move because we gotta build a castle somewhere." you know, a lot of people complain about that. That like why the Zora are not thriving in like
I
the
think I can
sea.
answer that.
But I had my own theory about that,
Okay.
and that the Great Sea, right, is kind of like a saltwater thing,
Yeah.
and and the Zora were always in fresh bodies of water. And if you know anything about fish, is that those two things are not compatible with each other at all.
So
You know?
become a bird.
Yeah,
that's funny too because it's like, oh, we're gonna flood this land. Hey, you guys that can't breathe salt water, good night. We're just gonna flood the whole land. Like it's all salt water now.
yeah.
That's
Well, it's
hilarious.
better than just dying like everybody else.
I think I, I think it's a decent explanation.
Yeah. The only thing that's weird about that though is that in Majora's Mask, the Zora do live in the ocean.
That is true.
But it could be a different breed of Zora, but they are in the ocean.
Yeah,
I think another way to think about it is, um the idea was to seal away Hyrule forever, wash it over. Flooding over Hyrule. It's meant to be sealed away forever. I think the implication is that the Zora would have evolved, or gone away in some form, because if the Zora were still around, Hyrule wouldn't exactly be sealed away. Like it wouldn't it wouldn't work. I think thematically the Zora changed because just because of poetically it was about leaving Hyrule behind, just abandoning it. And to the Zora, that meant, taking to the skies because they were abandoning uh, what was below the water, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Deku survived fine. Like the Deku are in the Wind Waker universe, and they're the great Deku tree is around. There's actually no Gorons.
A different Deku tree.
There's one
Oh
Goron, and
yeah, it's implied that that's the Deku tree that you help
Yeah,
sprout.
it's the sprout.
it's the sprout that told you about your origin as a Hylian back in Ocarina of Time.
Hmm.
And now he's this big tree that is all grown up, and it has the Koroks. And there's one Goron in the game. There might be like one other one, but there's not, like, the Gorons are not this big tribe anymore. And it makes sense. I mean, they got flooded. Like, how are they going to survive in that universe if everything got flooded? There's no way they could
Well, he
swim.
made it though.
That one guy made it, man. It's really sad because the Gorons are my favorite race. But yeah. So the Wind Waker, and of course it ends with Link putting the Master Sword through Ganondorf's face, and
Violently
the
too.
very violently, yeah, which is very violently just by any standards, but even more when you think of how cartoony the art style is. They were like, "Yo, let's crank this to 20 and let's make this really violent."
Hmm.
Another funny thing about this game is that Ganondorf this is the same Ganondorf, right?
Same
Yes,
guy.
So he sees this guy in Link's clothing trying to stop his plans, and he doesn't immediately kill him. he's like, I'm gonna throw him off my fortress and let him do
Well,
whatever he wants.
it's poetic though because Ganondorf has always been overconfident, and in game, Ganondorf recognizes that this person isn't actually the hero of time. Like he wonders about it. He looks at Link and he wonders,
Yeah, he thinks
but
about it. He takes
looks
a
at him.
moment.
He can tell that it's not him.
yeah,
And when he gets the Master Sword and it's unpowered, and he's like, "Bro, you have no chance," and he just swats him away because he's like not even a threat. He's just a dumb kid with a stupid broken sword.
Yeah, but still, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh
it's
yeah,
funny to
it's
think about.
super
it
stupid.
is funny. It is funny.
Just kill him.
Yeah,
Why
but
not?
what's funny is the thing is that if you actually look at the timeline, I actually have a different opinion of this now, because in this timeline, right, this is the adult timeline where Ganon saw Link as a kid, blasted him in the middle of Hyrule Field as he was chasing Zelda in Ocarina of Time, and then that Link had to grow up 7 years and kill him and stop Ganon, right?
Hmm.
This Ganondorf in Wind Waker has only seen Link that one time. And so when he sees him as a kid again in Wind Waker, there's that great scene where he just sees him and he just slaps him. And he's just like, "Get out of here, man. Like, you're just a little kid. I body you just like I did before. You're going to have to grow up 7 years
I
after
thought that he was defeated, and this is what happens afterwards.
Yes, but he's defeated by adult Link in this timeline.
So he doesn't even realize. I'm pretty sure he realizes this is the same person though.
Wait, hold on. I
I'm
think we're
not
getting
gonna-
confused here.
It's not the same Link as Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, right.
He has
But
lost
he
to Link
knows,
once before. In this,
that he lost to the child
yes,
that
yes.
eventually became adult Link in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, yes.
So he did
But
see him more than once.
maybe he's like, oh, like he's still a kid. Like he's not going to be a problem. Like
Yeah,
that guy was a problem when he was an adult.
I think it's just a resemblance thing. Like I think he looks at him, obviously sees the green tunic, and he gets like PTSD. But
Yeah,
then he like looks at him for a minute and he's like, never mind, it's just a stupid kid.
yeah. It's just a kid dressed up like with his grandma's outfit on, and it can't possibly be the same guy that stopped me all those years ago.
Also,
Um,
Ganondorf has the Trident of Power at the time. He could probably sense that he doesn't have the power of the Triforce within himself.
That's a good point
yeah,
too.
yeah, and also in this game, in this is one of the games where Link has to assemble the pieces of the Triforce of Courage.
Because of
In
Zelda.
none of the other 3D Zelda games does he have to do that. So this is almost like the most unlikely version of like the hero of Link. Like, out of all the heroes at this point in time to have become the hero to have the Triforce of Courage, it's almost like this one is like the least worthy in a way. Like it's like he had to do the most work to actually get to that point where he could fight Ganondorf. He
That's
has
because
to
he's
get
not
the
the
Mad
hero.
Sword. Yeah,
He's a
he's
whole new original soul. He's
exactly.
a whole different person than Skyward Sword Link and his descendants.
Yeah, and his motivation at the beginning of the game is that his sister gets abducted by a giant bird, and it's not about saving the land, and it's not about saving Zelda. It's not about any of that. It's literally just I need to get my sister,
Yeah,
and then that
it's the
turns
most
into
personal story.
yeah, and it just turns into the bigger adventure where he stops Ganondorf, and so then we get into Phantom Hourglass came out on the DS, a direct sequel to Wind Waker. Wind Waker ends with Link and Zelda, Zelda going by her name, her like common name Tetra, and they go off on this big ship to go find new land and found Hyrule. And on the way there, they get bodied by some random force, has nothing to do with Ganon, and Link has to go on another adventure to save Zelda in that universe.
Hmm.
But yeah, this is the exact same Link from the Wind Waker, and the Kingdom of Hyrule is founded in a new land at the end of Phantom Hourglass. They find this giant land. They found this new Hyrule. So like the old Hyrule is under the ocean, and now they found this new one on land, and they start this new kingdom there. And then Spirit Tracks happens where the Demon King Malladus is revived, and then of course defeated, and that's Spirit Tracks, and that's the last game on this timeline.
An
So
interesting thing about Spirit Tracks is that the people who founded this new Hyrule deliberately went against the word of the king. He's like, this land will not be called Hyrule. What do they call
And
it?
then they call it New Hyrule.
Hyrule.
yeah, so at the you're saying at the end of Wind Waker, the old king who took the form of the King of Red Lions in Wind Waker, and he's trying to guide you to help stop Ganon. He basically says that once you defeat Ganon, like they're like, oh, let's restore Hyrule, and he's like, no, this land's time has come and it's over, and we're flooding it, and the past is the past, and Ganondorf is gonna be down here with us, and the Master Sword is down here. This whole thing
The
is ending
Triforce is
here.
down there too.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not.
After the wish, it flew away
Okay.
somewhere.
Oh, right. So then they go off in search of their own future that's completely separate from like this royal bloodline stuff and like this Triforce stuff and all of that. And they end up calling the land Hyrule again, even though he told them, just do your own thing, man. Do not repeat this timeline. But as far as the video games go, that's the last game on the adult timeline. Or so we think. So where does Breath of the Wild fit?
Child timeline.
Okay, so Breath of the Wild is after Twilight Princess and Four Swords Adventures, right?
Yeah,
If you believe
Right.
that.
if you believe that.
If you believe that. So it's interesting because playing Breath of the Wild, right? Like there's no direct relation to any other Zelda game, but it takes place after it's like the last game in the timeline in terms of like it takes place after everything else on that timeline, on the child timeline. And so the only references, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a few references, but they're very loose. So obviously like the names of like the towns and the rivers and the lakes are all references to old things that happened. But some of those old things are not things that are from the timeline that the game is placed in. So,
Yeah,
for
they're scattered
example,
around.
yeah. So, for example, there's like lakes that are named after characters that are in like, A Link to the Past or like, Legend of Zelda 2. And on that timeline, none of those existed. So, it's like a mere coincidence. And also, the only other thing I could think of is in Breath of the Wild, there's a kid that if you talk to him, he's at one of the barns and he's like telling you like, "Hey, I heard that there's this story where, us Hylians used to be up in the clouds in the skies and then we came down to here." And it's like a direct reference to Skyward Sword.
Hmm.
And that's really, really cool. But then the other direct reference that a lot of people missed, and I was talking to a friend about this the other day, I couldn't believe like no one else got this. If you collect all the memories in Breath of the Wild, right? There's the scene where Link is completely bodied by a guardian, and like that's one of the last memories that you unlock.
Hmm.
And Zelda is there's this huge battle and Link was just destroyed in it, and he's dead. Like he died, and she's dragging him through the mud, and it's raining, and she doesn't know where to take him. And then all of a sudden, you hear her hearing something from the Master Sword, and it doesn't say what it said, but you hear the same sound that you hear in Skyward Sword whenever Fee is talking to you. And so the Master Sword speaks to Zelda and tells her about the Shrine of Resurrection, which she places Link into, and then obviously when you start that game, you're starting the Shrine of Resurrection.
Hmm.
So it's really cool how like the only tie I can think of between Breath of the Wild and any of the other Zelda games, besides like those like naming references of like towns and stuff, the only thing that's like a real tangible connection is between Skyward Sword and that with that one scene in the game.
I don't know if I'm wrong with this, but I thought that they mentioned the Twilight in the game somewhere.
And there's a memory where Link is getting like knighted as like Zelda's like chosen knight or whatever, and she goes through this speech where it's like whether it's through the embers of Twilight or through or Skyward
Oh,
Path.
right.
But again, in the Japanese, it I believe the term used is like shadow. It's the term for Twilight Realm in Japanese is more of like Shadow Realm. It's not Twilight. It's the word for shadow, and that same word usage, as far from what I remember, is very similar or the same to like how the Dark World was referenced in like A Link to the Past. So I think that's actually a little ambiguous. Um, but there is in Goron City, there's some statues of famous Gorons, and it's all child timeline Gorons. It is, I think it has the Majora's Mask guy, where you get the Goron mask from. I think he's on there.
Oh,
Daruni? No, that's the
Um,
wrong one.
no, the Daruni is from Ocarina of
Darmani,
That's Darmani. Darmani. All
Darmani.
right.
the Great Darmani's on there. And I think there's like even either one of the elders or one of the children of the elders from I think one of the elders from Twilight Princess, one of the like Koron or whatever his name is.
Right.
And that's like I think there's a difference between having a stone monument in Goron City of child timeline characters and like naming a mountain after like a downfall timeline town. Like I think something
Yeah,
like
for sure. Because
monument
that's
is more it's more
a
tangible.
yeah, it's like a physical representation of something that existed. A name could be a coincidence, but resembling a person or rather a character in the game, right, is not a coincidence. It's like a direct reference.
But then at the same time, you have stuff from the Zora's domain, where there's like a little side quest where you have to read a bunch of plaques that go through the Zora's history. And in the Zora's history, um, the Zora Ruta becomes a sage. And in the child timeline, that doesn't happen. That only happens in the adult timeline.
Wow.
So if that was in the child timeline, that only could have been known if Link talked about what he saw and it became part of history, you know? That
Right.
would
Yeah.
have to be the explanation.
Wow. So
It's a
the
little
in
it's a little ambiguous.
right. So Breath of the Wild exists in a timeline where Majora's Mask existed, Twilight Princess existed, Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword existed. So any of those games can be used in the future for Breath of the Wild 2 in terms of adding even more lore and connections between those games because they're on the same timeline. It's interesting to me to think that like in Breath of the Wild's universe, the legendary hero of time was like a little kid and that's it. Like they don't know that he there's two other timelines where this guy failed and or became an adult and lived out the rest of his days and like that's just so interesting to me, man. That's awesome. I love that Ocarina of Time is like still important in the timeline if they choose to go back with Breath of the Wild too.
Sure.
Okay, wait. So in Twilight Princess, they sealed Ganon away.
At the end?
He
No,
dies.
no, no,
At
no.
the
Before that,
Yeah, well, he's locked
Basically, at the beginning
inside
of
the
the game.
Twilight Realm.
Yeah, but he
Yeah.
gets locked in there by the sages, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, but by like in Ocarina of Time,
a different set
basically.
of sages.
It's a different set of
Yeah.
sages. That's what I'm about to ask, because
The
it's like,
the ancient sages, as they say, which is a
okay,
different set of sages than the ones from Ocarina of Time. These
yeah,
are the sages that, in my opinion, probably maybe were involved with like the building of the Temple of Time back with like Raru.
Right.
Maybe I don't know. It's not really explained.
Wow, man. So Breath of the Wild 2, right? We let's get into what we think about that because and how that connects to the timeline and some of the lore because you have some of the most interesting like opinions on that. So one of the interesting things to me is that if you watch the trailer, which is like super, there's not a lot to see there. It's very quick. You're gonna have to freeze frame to even like analyze stuff. But from what we got, it looks like it's directly after Breath of the Wild, Link and Zelda. At the end of Breath of the Wild, they just set out to like walk around the land, and it picks up from there. So in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, we see them exploring caverns, right? It's established in the first game that the Sheikah technology and the Guardians and all that, they were all underground and they were unearthed. And that's where the problems in Breath of the Wild 2 happen. So now they're exploring underground where all this other stuff is. We just described all the other games that happened in this timeline already, right? So Twilight Princess, Majora's Mask, Skyward Sword, like Ocarina of Time. Technically, those are underground in this timeline, in this existence, this universe, Breath of the Wild 2. So they're exploring all that, and we see what looks like could be a Ganon like figure. And it's not confirmed that it's Ganon, but in the small frames that we got in that trailer, he's wearing the Gerudo gear. Like he looks like he's wearing Gerudo stuff. And he has this long, long red hair. If this is the same timeline and that is Ganondorf, it might be a different Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild 2 because would it be the same one from Twilight Princess? Is that even possible? Like, did he go from Ocarina of Time to Twilight Princess to possibly Breath of the Wild 2?
Um, I think I think it's kind of both. I think it's a different. I think it's different body, same spirit. I think it's a case where, uh, well, there's a few ways to go about it. Um, one route you could take is that, like after Twilight Princess, they did something with the body, and I don't, I don't know, somehow I don't know, brought him back and then sealed him or something. But I think what's going on is it's a future male Gerudo, basically a future Ganondorf, not necessarily even evil at the time, but I think it's a future Gerudo. And I think what they basically did was I think they summoned, basically at this point Ganondorf's a demon, like an actual demon. Like he's not like a human anymore. He's like a straight up demon like Demise was. I think basically what happened is they did like a two shot. Like they summoned Ganon into the body and then at the same time sealed him and basically trapped him there. And I think like that was basically like how before Link to the Past, the seven sages like seal away Ganon. Like I think that's what's going on here. Before the game happened, tens of thousands of years ago, um, they thought it would be a good idea to trap Ganondorf like this. And the result was, every 10,000 years, he would have enough malice formed to make Calamity Ganon. But Ganondorf himself was sealed away.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because so Ocarina of Time, the first time we see Ganondorf, right?
Hmm.
Then he gets sealed away. He comes back in Twilight Princess, and it's the same body. It's literally the same guy. The
Yep.
exact same guy comes back in Twilight Princess. But at the end of Twilight Princess, they kill him. He's not sealed away. There's no like, he's somewhere else. They actually kill him. And so once he's dead, this Breath of the Wild 2, even though it's in that same timeline, it's going to have to be a new Ganondorf that is somehow, this is going to be the second time that we ever saw a Ganondorf. Like the second time, this is the second person named Ganondorf. There are many people named Link, and there are many people named Zelda, but there's so far in before Breath of the Wild 2, there's only been one Ganondorf. So it's going to be interesting to see if they just decide to go. Maybe did he live?
I, s- I still I still very much think that even if it is a different body, I still think it's still Ganondorf. Like from it's easier to see in the downfall timeline because you have a situation where in Four Swords Adventures, Ganondorf is a man. He claims the Trident of Power, which I guess in Trial Timeline would be the equivalent of getting the Triforce of Power. He gets the
Mhm.
Trident of Power, and the overwhelming power turns him into the Demon King Ganon, and he becomes a demon. Um, and he is sealed away in the Triforce, or he's sealed away in the Four Sword. He breaks out, gets sealed away by the sages, and then a Link to the Past happens where he's killed. But then he gets resummoned in the Oracle games, gets defeated, and then he gets resummoned again, like not reincarnated, like summoned, like he's Demon King Ganon, the demon,
Right. It's
like
like he's not
on
even trapped to a human form anymore.
yeah,
It's like,
he's just appeared, and it happens like 3 times.
yeah.
Um, and we see in at least 2 games that there are rituals you can do to summon him. In the Oracle games, um, Twin Rova, which I guess is the same person as Ocarina of Time Twin Rova, but Twin Rova, wants to sacrifice the body of Zelda to resurrect Ganondorf, and it doesn't go right, and Ganon's kind of dumb, but like it still works. In the Adventure of Link, they're trying to kill Link to use his blood to revive Ganon, and if you lose, you get a game over, and Ganon returns.
Well,
Like there
and
are rituals
also
for this.
in A Link Between Worlds, like the main antagonist kind of like fuses with Ganondorf, or not
Sure,
Ganondorf, Ganon, right?
you
So
Ganon.
sorry.
It's Yuga and Ganon, so it's you Ganon.
Oh, okay. So it could also be like that's kind of like a summoning of from him, but in a more corrupted way, you know.
Possibly. Um,
And that could be some sort of something they could use in the new game as well, you know.
Yeah, I think it could be something very close to that. I think in the case of A Link Between Worlds, Yuga was powerful enough that he was able to at least like keep some control. But like I think if you were to just do what happened with Yuga, but just for like a regular mortal guy, I think that would basically be the equivalent of just, quote, resurrecting Ganon.
Yeah, because he becomes consumed by
He
Ganon.
Yeah, he would just take it over. Just take over the body, and it's just like that's it. That's Ganon.
Is it confirmed 100% that Breath of the Wild is in the child timeline? Because
No,
last I remember, they
no,
didn't
it's not.
confirm. It's
No,
not?
there's an interview with Aonuma where he implies that it does go in a specific timeline, but he's just not going to talk about it.
Oh my god.
He
I
wants to
think
leave it up
I
to their
think there was some
imagination.
controversy when like the Hyrule Historia came out and all that kind of stuff, and they're like having to be more tight-lipped about it now again.
Yeah.
And personally, I prefer it that way because I do think that they kind of do it game by game, right?
Yeah, things
And
change.
they just say change things when they can and they want to, right? And it's more fun to just do it yourself anyway, you know?
hmm There's enough material. Like
Absolutely.
it's not like we can't like work it out ourselves.
So now let's get into the really interesting conspiracy theories. Some of them we already touched on a little bit, but let's talk about like I want to hear about this time traveling Sheikah thing because that sounds like the most interesting one. So let's just go with that one. Um, Explain to me this time traveling Sheikah theory by. I want to give credit to the person who's credited with this theory, Rinkudo.
Yeah,
Explain this to me.
he's um he's a French guy. He does like really nice like French Zelda theory stuff. Um, but the idea is in Skyward Sword, a major mechanic is the Gate of Time, and it's a Sheikah creation, and it lets you travel through time. Um, but in Skyward Sword, the only Sheikah we see is Impa. Um, we know there were more because they were all around the Lanayru area. Like they built, like they were clearly like more of a tribe than just one person. Um, and based, in my opinion, um, the technology that the Sheikah had in the past of Breath of the Wild, like all the cool Sheikah tech, um, I think it most closely resembles what we see in Skyward Sword. It's, we're talking, uh, blue orbs that can power stuff. We're talking, mechanical Armos creations that are just basically a guardian. They have a little blue eye on top that like kind of glows blue, and it shoots like a blue plasma beam at you. It looks the same. Um, and I think that's not a coincidence. I think what the implication, because you have a situation where you have a civilization that is so advanced, they have created mechanical automatons that are basically sentient.
Right.
They've created flying contraptions. They have hover technology or stuff. Um, enough to the point where they can create a time travel gate, but they're all gone. But then it looks like all of their technology came back, you know, tens of thousands of years in the future. And in the prologue of Skyward Sword, it mentions that like Hylia defended the surface. She sent all the humans to Skyloft. Skyloft went up, and she defended and she defended the surface. And it shows the tribes that were with her, and it was like the Kikwi, which were those forest guys, the Magma, which were those moles, the Gorons, and the Perella, which were some say the Zora's ancestors. But like, where's the Sheikah? The Sheikah isn't there. um, they're gone. They're nowhere to be seen. They're not mentioned. They didn't fight because when you fight Demise, he says that no humans stood against him last time. Um, so, it seems to me like they weren't even around when Demise hit. And Demise was also like the first like cataclysm. So why would they be gone? It seems like to me the obvious implication is that they time traveled. Like they left. The Hylia had this big plan. It involved Impa having to stay behind to guide Zelda, the first reincarnation of Hylia, to awaken and set everything in motion. But the rest of them, I think they had um, their destiny was in the future, and I think that's where they went. I think they just went
Yeah, that makes so much sense because if in Skyward Sword, they're basically implying that the humans are not land dwellers at all. Like they all exist in the sky,
right.
but Impa's already down there,
Hmm.
and on top of that, um, the time shift, the that gate of time is already there, and there
Yeah,
are human looking, like there's for like there's churches and temples and like staircases and stuff
stuff
like that.
built for humans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like there must have been humans here at some point. It makes a lot of sense that it would be Sheikah, and they were like, "Yo, we're just gonna dip. This is bad."
Well, that's kind of what I was saying at the opening of the podcast, right? Where I was like, these things had to be built by somebody, you know?
Hmm.
Like that's the thought that came across my head as I was playing the game, and I didn't know the extents of all the implications of that, but
I
Yeah.
think it actually explains the robots pretty well too. I think the robots were created because the Sheikah left. Like
yeah, that's a good
I
explanation
think
of that.
they needed someone to keep mining the time shift stones because they were still needed, but the Sheikah had to leave the time.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So another theory, and this is credited to you, is the time shift stone theory, right? This has to do, is it, this basically goes hand in hand with the traveling Sheikah idea?
Kinda, yeah. It's more so about what the time shift stones like actually are, and like what's actually happening with it in like the desert area where you see it being mined and stuff.
Yeah, so for a quick refresher, anyone who played Skyward Sword, one of the three main areas you go to is this desert, and it has like an ocean area, but it's mostly a barren desert. The only thing there is like these time shift crystals, and when you activate the crystals, it creates like a small bubble where in that bubble it goes back in time to where when that desert was a lush green area, and it's probably the coolest area in the game. I know Hungry's talked about this a lot, where that's his favorite part of Skyward Sword, and it's actually
It's so
so
cool.
sick. Yeah, it's amazing. So that desert used to be a more lush environment, and it makes a lot of sense that if it was this lush environment and there are these robots that are here and they're mining these crystals that go back in time, this also goes hand in hand with the Sheikah thing that we were just talking about. So, but yeah, so that there's that whole area of the game, and there's a lot of robots and stuff, and there's like electricity and a lot of more like things that you wouldn't associate with Zelda as much, because Zelda is seen as more of a like medieval or past thing, and there's all this technology in this one area of this game.
Yeah, it's more
Um,
fantasy than it is sci-fi. Basically, we kind of got at.
yeah, definitely not medieval. Definitely more
Mhm.
fantasy than sci-fi. But yeah, tell us more about your theory on this time shift thing.
So I've been playing through a lot of the 3D Zelda games recently. I've been emulating them, and there's a cool feature in the emulators where you can dump the textures as you're playing. And so I'll play through, I'll let all the textures dump into a folder, and then I'll check them out. Because there's a lot of there's a lot of repeating patterns and stuff. I feel like it's like opening up a book when you look at the actual like art assets. Um, and in the Lineru area, you can you see there's a mining operation, there's time shift stones, but like they don't explicitly tell you what's going on. Um, but if you like just look at the area and kind of connect the dots, I think what's basically going on is the time shift stones are like naturally occurring. They're like raw stones that are just like in the ground, and they're dug up. Uh, there's like conveyor belts kind of situated around the area. Those conveyor belts would take the raw stones to there's an area in the main desert called the Lanero mining facility. Goes there, and I think from here there's a platform that comes off of this area that basically leads through a tunnel. It has like has some conveyor belts coming out to where like stones could come out from the factory, and there's a railway that leads through this like kind of twisting path, but the end location is the Thunder Dragon. And when you talk to the robots, the robots they tell you that um, part of like the pipeline for the time shift stones being refined is taking them to the Thunder Dragon. Like, you know, does he inspect them? Like
Right.
they take the stones to the Thunder Dragon. The Thunder Dragon, if you look at his body, he has these like lines going down his body, and they glow uh like the color of electricity in the Zelda games, which is like this like turquoise-ish blue. The same color that all of the Sheikah the all of the ancient technology glows with as well. The tech all glows blue. Um, all of the time shift stones are used like electricity. It's like just like a blue liquid. Um,
Yeah.
so I think I think my game theory is
And
that
that's it.
my game theory is that the Thunder Dragon's role in all of this is that he charges the stones. Like, I think the difference between a raw time shift stone and one that you can hack at and make time switch, I think the difference is that the Thunder Dragon powered it up. I think that was his role. Um, and I think that's why that was part of the pipeline, is because he had to like imbue it.
Yeah, it's interesting too because now that you mentioned that, all of the time traveling stuff in Zelda games is usually like that same blue.
Hmm.
So in Ocarina of Time, you get an ocarina in the game, and it's just like this
It's blue.
beige. Like, well, first you get a normal one, right? And
Well,
it's
that's
just
the
like,
fairy
oh,
Yeah,
ocarina.
it's
not
just a
blue.
regular ocarina, and it's like not blue. But then the one that allows you to time travel is the blue one. And then on top of that, the stones that you play the Song of Time to move them throughout the game in the dungeons, they are that same rich like color blue throughout the game. And so there's almost like this theme of like that blue shade is associated with the energy or the time traveling element.
I,
So
I
that
think
might
it's
connect all the
ultimately what it
games.
is.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. I wonder if Breath of the Wild 2 is going to introduce any time traveling stuff, because that's like one of the only like Zelda convention things that like they didn't find a way to reinvent for Breath of the Wild. But clearly, the Sheikah in that timeline, they create guardians and insane technology. Like it makes a lot of sense that they could have and introduce a lot of this time travel stuff.
I actually have like a crazy conspiracy theory. Um, I'm not sure if I buy it.
Mhm.
But the idea was the like the Zonai, like that mysterious tribe of the past in Breath of the Wild that like made those ruins and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I I kind of had like a passing thought that like the Faron region, the dragon there is the Thunder Dragon. It's a different dragon than the one from Skyward Sword, but it's a Thunder element dragon. The Faron region is the home of the Zonai. The Faron region is highly associated with thunder. Some of the Zonai related extra areas are also electrically aligned, like the Thundra Plateau, where it thunderstorms 24/7 until you complete the shrine. There's another area like that too. And you have like the Zonai towers, which are these like the columns that you see kind of spread around Hyrule.
Yeah.
In the original concept art of the game, those were more obviously Zonai. They had like dragon designs on them and like all this stuff. Um, and there's also the people who believe that the luminous stones, the luminous stones are set in game to like, have the power of the souls of the dead or something like that. Um, I basically asked myself, what if luminous stones are raw time shift stones? And
Wow.
if you go on that assumption, what would happen if you put a luminous stone on a column and then deliberately made it strike lightning there? It's like, is that how you make a time shift stone?
Well, yeah,
Like, does that
wow.
work? And
Right.
and if so, is that how the ancient Sheikah made their stuff? Like, is that how they got it? I don't know. It's just a thought, but
And
That's
anytime
really
that you're
interesting.
inside of like a cave, or like the rare moments where in Breath of the Wild you're like, you find Illumina stones, it's like in cavernous areas like that. Like
hmm
it's not just like the average rocks. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So yeah, that's really interesting.
it's kind of out there. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of evidence to support it, but I think it's a really cool idea.
It's interesting to say the least.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting because the Zonai are one of the only civil like races in Zelda that it's like new, introduced in Breath of the Wild, but they're
Very
you know
low key.
I
well,
think we've seen them before.
we don't even know what they look like. Like as of the lore, the official lore of Breath of the Wild, it's this mysterious race that was lost many many years ago,
hmm
and they're said to have been like these very savage people in the Faron region. So
So, what are you implying that you think we've seen them before?
So, one of the theories that uh, that I proposed on my list of like five that I want to tackle is called the Interloper conspiracy, and it's basically this idea that the Interlopers, the Twilight, the Oka, the Zonai are basically all the same people. Um, and the timeline is basically um, originally they were Hylians. They were on Skyloft, so they can trace their genealogy back to Skyward Sword. But when like after Skyward Sword ended, I don't think it's necessary that everybody was under the same tribe. I think you know before the events of Skyward Sword, it's like kind of implied that there were multiple different tribes of humans that were still human, but they just lived in separate areas and had their own culture. Um, I think that after the events of Skyward Sword, there was just uh, a tribe of people that lived in the Faron region, and they were magic wielders and stuff. And I guess at first they were totally cool, but eventually their magical power grew. um, they started getting like kind of cool technology, like you see the Oka, they have like their sky cannons. They have, they made their own flying like floating city that's like separate from Skyloft.
The
Um,
Oka are the little bird-like creatures
yeah,
from Twilight Princess, and you famously see them like you see one of them per dungeon, but then you finally go to the Sky Temple where that's supposed to be their civilization, and it's a very futuristic temple. Like it's not like any of the other temples you go to in Twilight Princess,
and it's
and
built for humans.
yeah, it's not built for those little chicken bodies. It's built for humans, and there's a lot of technology there.
Built for
Yeah,
humans, yet there's chickens living there.
Chickens
It's
right.
with like
because
weird face masks,
the
body
chickens
heads.
used to be people. And those people, I think, are basically the remains of like the Wind tribe from like Minish Cap. Those are people that uh, basically are Hylian by descent, but they separated off and have their own culture, and they took their palace to the skies. Um, and I think that, like, if you compare, if you were to go through the textures in Twilight Princess, and you were to compare the kinds of things you see in the Twilight Realm and in the City in the Sky with the Oka, there's actually a lot of really, really similar designs, and there's a lot of things that kind of seem to tie them together. Like for example, on a lot of the Twilight designs, you see this circle with like a half circle over it, and it's on the doors, it's like on a bunch of stuff, and it's not like a distinct like pattern that might mean something, but it's a repeated symbol that is seen on all kinds of stuff. And you can find it in the City in the Sky. It's like in the shop where like you first go. It's just like one of the designs on the wall. Yeah. Um, there's a pattern. There's another pattern where it's just like these four little swirls in like a kind of a boxy shape, and it's like seen in the City in the Sky, just kind of like in like designs around. But then
Yeah.
in the Twilight Realm, you can find that design in like on like the hands that hold on to those orbs, the souls.
Oh, that's right. I
It's
do
this,
remember
it's
that.
the exact same design. Like you could look at the textures side by side. It's the exact same design. Um, if you look at the Tower of the Gods in Wind Waker, that big tower that comes out of the ocean, um, which looks like a Sheikah shrine, by the way. Um, if you look if you look on the like on the outside of the Tower of the Gods, there's all these archways and stuff, but there's like letters, there's like foreign characters all over it, and it's the exact same characters that you see in the Twilight Realm. Like they even reuse the exact same texture, just redrawn.
Wow.
Like
That's really cool.
it's the same size texture, it's the same characters, it's just a different color, basically.
So what do you think that means exactly?
I think it means they were built by the same people. I think that um, I think the Sheikah, you know, aren't really that different from the Interlopers. Um, I think that humanity has just a lot more uh, different sections than what we see. I think there's more. there's a lot of culture that we don't see in the games that is just kind of like implied off screen.
Yeah,
And
right.
the another location that ties into all those is the Forest Temple in Twilight Princess, the first temple in the game. You have textures that also match up with the Tower of the Gods and the Twilight Realm. You have a texture that shows an upside down Triforce and like a skull, like stuff that's not
Wow.
typically seen in Zelda, except for like Majora's Mask in like the Stone Tower area, which is like supposed to be mocking the gods.
Yeah.
Um, there's a in the room where you fight the mini boss, like the monkey, there's like
Mhm.
there's like a like an octagon, like a gray octagon in the middle of the room where the totem pole is, and it has all these like, circuitry looking, twilight looking like lines. And it looks like it came out of the Shadow Realm, basically, like the Twilight Realm, but it's just in the Forest Temple. Um, and I think the people in the Forest Temple are basically the Zonai. I think what it basically is the interlopers are basically you have Hylians. Over time they become some of them become the Wind Tribe. Um, Over time some of the Wind Tribe become the Oka. But over time some of the other Hylians that didn't become Wind Tribe went to Faron and basically lived in the woods, lived in the forest. Same kind of technology that they originally had, but they developed in an entirely different way because of their culture and location. And the people that lived in Faron were the brutal, savage Zonai that we hear about. And they're gone because they got banished to the Twilight Realm.
Oh, wow.
Like that's them. The Twilight are the interlopers, are the Zonai, are it kind of goes on, but
Right.
I
Yeah.
think it's all connected.
I think it's so cool that like it's all like this like shadowy, like uh, more puns, but like this kind of like shadow organization.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? That's like spans like throughout like the history of like the Zelda timeline and universe, right? That just
Also,
like they operate in secret and they do all these crazy things.
history is written by the winner, and the winner is the Sheikah. Okay, the the, the Sheikah are into some shady stuff. They,
Oh no, for sure. The Ocarina of
like
Time like, proves that for a shadow of a doubt. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
like even the interpretation that the interlopers were bad, that might even be an exaggeration.
That can
Like
be true too.
the story of the original like King of Darkness that led the Twilight people back then, that may have been uh there may be context to it. Like it might not just be as simple as powerful sorcerer take trident, powerful sorcerer take over Hyrule. Like it might be more complex than that.
Yeah, that's interesting. When is the first time, or which game is the first time where the interlopers are like supposed to exist? Is it the Civil War of Ocarina of Time?
Well, were they first named or were they first implied to exist?
Yeah, implied.
I
First
believe it's
implied to exist would be when the interlopers are supposed to be banished, which is the Hyrule Historia timeline puts it between Skyward Sword and Minish Cap. I put it after Minish Cap and before Ocarina of Time, but it's like somewhere in that area before
Yeah,
Ocarina of Time.
interesting. Wow.
Some people actually think that, um, and I might actually, I think it might be true. What would what do you think would happen to the Kokiri if the Great Deku Tree died? Do you think they'd start growing up?
Yeah, right, right. What would happen?
Maybe they did grow up and they are the people who lived in the Forest Temple and they are the people who got banished to the Twilight Realm. Maybe not, because the timing could also conflict because uh the Kokiri being an Ocarina of Time and the Twilight being banished around Minish Cap, that wouldn't line up. So, they couldn't be the same people, but
but
maybe descendants. I don't know.
someone who had to have lived in that forest temple.
Sure,
You know,
exactly. Some
there has to
some
be a purpose
people
for
lived
it,
there, and whoever lived there were kind of dark, and
and
they kind of
they
they match the
lost.
description of the Zonai.
They lost some sort of battle against somebody because it's a decrepit place filled with ghosts, right? Obviously, they died there. So who could they be? And then them being like the Zonai or the Interlopers or whatever you want to call them, there's like reason to believe that those things are connected.
Hmm.
Especially because if they're um if the Interlopers are like the people who lost in the Civil War, right, which is before Ocarina of Time,
Hmm.
right, that could have been their place of origin, right,
Yeah, and that could have
and
been.
yeah, so there's a lot of connections there that are very very plausible.
Yeah, and it's also one of these things that it reminds me of how I remember when Splatoon 2 got like the Octo expansion, they did an interview with the two developers of like the DLC, and one of the things they described was how within the confines of Nintendo, they have like a term between each other called like Nintendo Dark. And they were saying how, obviously Nintendo at like its face value, it's like a company that's very like child friendly and family friendly and like Mario's all happy and all that stuff. But the developers were saying that like if you look between the lines of all of their games, like from the very beginning, there's always like this dark side in either the lore or the level design, or like it's not always like very apparent, but there's always like this dark side to everything that they do, or at least some of their entries in some of their franchises. And they refer to that as like the Nintendo Dark effect, where it's like the obvious examples are like Majora's Mask, where that game is just really dark and it's very obviously dark. But then you have like the less obvious examples, like what we said about Twilight Princess, where the Stalfos that's teaching you these things is it's very clear that that is Ocarina of Time Link, but now he's this, and that's not a happy ending for that character.
He even
So
has the Master Sword scabbard. If you look at the texture of his scabbard that he pulls his sword from, it's just an older version of the Master Swords.
wow, that's amazing. That's actually amazing. I didn't even know that.
He only pulls it out during one skill.
Wow.
It's the I think it's the quick draw
The
where he like
mortal
has it
draw.
sheathed and pulls it out. The mortal draw.
The Mortal Draw. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Moving forward into Breath of the Wild 2. Um, how much of this stuff do you think that they're going to incorporate into the game? And are there any breadcrumbs in that trailer that we got that imply like any of this stuff, like the timeline or the interlopers or any of these theories being kind of like, is there any possibility in either of your minds that like they're gonna kind of use any of that?
Well, there is. I mean, Breath of the Wild just in general has a very blue motif with any of the Sheikah technology, right? So, but like in the underground Sheikah location they're in, right? There's obviously a lot of blue, and this Ganondorf esque creature, it looks like he's being sealed, right? And some of that technology isn't in couldn't doesn't inherently have to be all Sheikah. So
Sure.
maybe the interlopers are involved in some way, especially if they not all the things we discover are going to be Sheikah technology.
Yeah, right.
So it'd be cool to see that. I think the interlopers in general are probably my favorite like uh lore of like the hidden lore of the games. They're very mysterious,
Hmm.
and they're very shadow like where everything's in the background. Never too much we learn from them, like from the main story of the game. If it is, it's never a lot.
Right. Um, I think they'll. I mean, ultimately, I think they'll probably bring in a bunch of new stuff. Um, but I would really like to see some kind of callback to the uh, like the the trailer has a lot of Zonai like architecture and stuff. Like if you look at the trailer, like the bridge they cross has all of the
Yeah.
architecture styles of the Zonai. Um, Even the room where Ganondorf is sealed, it doesn't even look like it's like Sheikah made. Like we know what Chica stuff looks like. It glows blue. It's like electrical. Whereas like it's like yeah, there's like some like the glowing hand, but even the glowing hand isn't blue. It's like closer to the neon this closer to like the turquoise-ish green that like the Twilight Realm is known for.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm kind of inclined to think that if this, I'm sure the Sheikah are involved to some extent, but I don't think it's only them. It's
Yeah.
like
That makes
it
yeah.
doesn't look like it's all them.
No, and that actually makes a lot of sense too, because here's the thing, like at this point they have to explain, by going into the ruins they're going to have to explain more about where that technology comes from. And like you said, I'm sure we're going to find out, and we've already seen things that are going to be completely new. But some people actually take for granted how much storytelling there is in Breath of the Wild in that way, because it's very, very subtle, and it's not like at the forefront. They don't force you to watch cutscenes in that game. But I have no doubt in my mind that they put so much thought into this architecture's here, and we're going to put, there has to be some more meaning behind it. And it's not just going to be like, that looks cool and that's it. Like, there's going to be depth there. And it's probably going to lead back to a lot of the stuff that we just discussed during this whole podcast, which is really, really exciting. Like, I actually, dude, I can't believe how excited I am for Breath of the Wild 2. I think this might actually be the most excited I've ever been
I
for
know,
a
it's
video game
crazy.
in my whole life. Like, Super Smash Melee was the first one, and then this one is just like, I have not been this excited in so long, dude. I
Mhm.
cannot wait.
There's another really interesting detail in the trailer. Um, when you see Zelda like looking at the wall and there's like a painting or there's like a wall mural or whatever,
Yeah,
and it's like a guy on a horse and stuff. If you kind of like clear up the picture and look at it, it's like it looks like Ganondorf riding horseback, holding a trident, with four other Gerudo on horseback around him.
yeah,
And from what I know of the Zelda series, I think the best time that could be a depiction of is the Civil War before Ocarina of Time. Um, when you fight Phantom Ganon in Ocarina of Time, he has a trident.
right.
Um, and I think that's a callback. I think the trident in the trailer is meant to be a callback to Phantom Ganon, which would just be Ganon. It would be a reflection of him. I think the implication is that Ganondorf used a trident back before he, got the Triforce. Back when he was just the great thief or whatever. Uh, I think the trident was his weapon of choice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's amazing how much there is to pick apart in that little teaser. It feels like it was over in the blink of an eye, but there's like, the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, oh my God, there really
And
is a
what's it
lot
what's
there.
it doing down there? How old is that?
Yeah,
How long back does this go?
yeah. Oh my God. Zelda conspiracy theories, guys.
It's too much.
So let's wrap this up. Um, Thank you guys so much for celebrating this amazing 35th anniversary with me on this show. This is obviously probably the longest podcast we ever did. I think it's worth it. It's it is deserving. All right, Zelda deserves it. So Arhungry, tell your fans, tell the class where they can find you. Tell them your social media, all that.
Okay, so the one place you want to go for sure is youtube.com/rhungry. I don't have any dedicated Zelda videos on there, but there is a Zelda motif in the remake video I made, just discussing remakes as a concept in general. There's a lot of Zelda stuff in that, if you're interested. Should be coming out with a new video pretty soon. Be excited for that. For updates, find me on twitter.com/mf_rhungry. If I have any updates on videos or just me saying something stupid, it'll be on there. Yeah, that's all I gotta say.
All right, man. And David GWJ, thank you
Uh,
for coming on. Tell the
yes,
feds where they can find you.
you could find me only on Twitter at GameWinnerJ. Um, if you are interested in getting involved as a Zelda conspiracy theorist, you could DM me there, and I could point you in the direction of some strong, powerful, friendly communities who can help you collaborate and make some friends.
Z-Anon.
Z-Anon.
All right, guys. That's this week's show. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you, guys. We are out.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. See you next week. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Super Glentendo. The Glentendo podcast is a weekly Nintendo/Smash community podcast. Our aim is to have galaxy brain conversations on all things Nintendo. If you like the show, please consider becoming a friendo and supporting on patreon.com/Glentendo. Friendos get early access to the show each Thursday. The show then becomes free to all the following Sunday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts right now and you actually like the show, please give us a good review. It helps boost our visibility so more people can find the show. This show is brought to you by our amazing producers, Naomi Eduardo, In a Yellow Flash, and the legendary Riz.